settle down. I think we have the quorum, so we can start the proceedings. Good morning and welcome back to the third day of Executive Board. I hope you had a good night rest and we're ready for another rather long day. We'll resume our proceedings as we left yesterday on agenda item 3.3, implementation of the International Health Regulations, draft strategic plan, which is contained in document EB 142/10. So we were having interventions from non-state actors. I would request International Federation of Medical Students Association to take the floor, to be followed by the World Medical Association. So IFMSA, you have the floor.
Thank you. Honourable Chair, distinguished delegates. In an ever-globalised world with changing patterns of migration, travel, animal trade and agriculture, it is clear that many of the factors which contribute to the emergence of disease require input from parties beyond the healthcare sector. Considering the importance of a One Health approach, we appreciate guiding principle point 5, intersectoral approach, a principle which we promote and prioritise through the World Health Students Alliance. The Alliance is a collaboration which aims to strengthen interdisciplinary health advocacy. The Alliance, active since 2014, has a reach-out capacity of over 1.8 million health students in more than 100 countries worldwide. We also recognise the importance of country ownership and leadership in the strategic plan and the subsequent need to strengthen Member States' capacities in creating achievable and transdisciplinary responses adapted to specific health systems. Therefore, we urge Member States to include all relevant non-governmental and local stakeholders in their responses to emergencies, as well as advocate for joint One Health efforts to strengthen preparedness. Youth are undoubtedly an important agent of positive change in the world. Through active participation, healthcare students are empowered to play a vital role in their own development, as well as of that in their communities. A combined approach of community mobilisation and social media was used effectively by medical students from Sierra Leone in the Kick Ebola Out campaign. Similarly, veterinary students globally promote rabies awareness and address specific local concerns. Therefore, ensuring the full and effective participation of youth and students contributes positively for a better public health preparedness and builds the resilience of nations to better respond to outbreaks and other emergencies. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. World Medical Association is requested to take the floor, to be followed by Global Health Council.
Honourable Chairperson, distinguished delegates, thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the World Medical Association, supported by the World Health Professions Alliance, representing over 31 million physicians, nurses, pharmacists, dentists, and physical therapists in more than 130 countries. We welcome the Director General's report on WHO's work in health emergencies. We are alarmed not only by the number and severity of emergencies, but also by the fact that healthcare professionals and facilities are increasingly attacked during situations of armed conflict, a clear violation of international humanitarian and human rights law. We urge those involved in conflicts to protect civilians as well as healthcare capacities and to respect the ethical obligation of health personnel to treat all patients irrespective of who they are. We call for the implementation of the ethical principles of healthcare in times of armed conflict and other emergencies endorsed by civilian and military healthcare organizations in 2015. We urge governments to fulfill their obligations under international human rights and humanitarian law and to implement the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2286, condemning attacks and threats against medical personnel and facilities in conflict situations and demanding an end to impunity for those responsible. Furthermore, we strongly recommend to facilitate research into the timeliness and effectiveness of international interventions so that planning and interventions in future health emergencies are better informed, to develop collaboration with health professional organizations to ensure that accurate and timely clinical care guidelines are available to health providers, and WHO and other UN agencies working with governments and relevant partners as infectious as infections emerge and reemerge, to continue to ensure that accessible information is available to all people in the affected zone, in particular on disease prevention, optimal hygiene, and infection control practices. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Global Health Council and then International Council of Nurses.
Thank you, Chair. The Global Health Council, supported by PASS, GHTC, AAP, and IDSA, appreciate this opportunity to comment. GHC members have decades of experience in preventing, detecting, and responding to outbreaks, and in the development, scale-up, and delivery of life-saving technologies. We welcome this report, and the Research and Development Blueprint for Action to Prevent Epidemics is an important call to action. We applaud recent progress in strengthening country capacity, including the successful containment of the 2017 Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The Global Health Security Roadmap led to improved collaboration among partners and stakeholders, mobilizing supplies and responders, including a mobile laboratory for rapid sampling, allowing the Ministry of Health to respond effectively. DRC now has activated an emergency operations center connected across relevant ministries to enable rapid response to public health emergencies, such as the recent cholera outbreak. These experiences have shown that infectious disease physicians and scientists are not only central in the response, but also provide vital expertise to policy formulation and system strengthening to achieve IHR compliance. Health professional associations are also a critical voice. We support efforts by WHO and member states to promote compliance with the international health regulation and call for concerted global and national action to accelerate pandemic preparedness. We are heartened that more than 60 countries have completed joint external evaluation. We urge WHO and member states to enact the recommendations of the 2017 International Working Group on Financing Preparedness and ensure that every country has a costed, financed national action plan by 2019. We urge the creation of an independent monitoring and accountability mechanism, further action on the research and development blueprint, and the robust inclusion of antimicrobial resistance in WHO's health preparedness and response plans. These are critical steps in continuing the political momentum to improve preparedness generated by the 2014 Ebola crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. May I now request International Council of Nurses to take the floor, and that would be followed by Medicus Mundi International.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the International Council of Nurses and the over 20 million nurses worldwide. We thank WHO for the draft Global Strategic Plan. Improving public health preparedness and response is of utmost importance, considering the ongoing risk of public health events occurring secondary to natural and human-induced hazards, such as climate change and conflict. Nurses are critical to preventing, detecting, assessing, and responding to public health events. Nurses are the front line of care during and after public health events, providing acute care, response coordination, information management, mental health support, and other important duties. We also work to create strong, resilient health systems able to respond to shocks. Our technical skills and knowledge of epidemiology, pharmacology, cultural familial structures, and psychosocial issues, coupled with our experience in health system strengthening, makes the nursing profession of particular value to the development of national plans and policies for public health preparedness and response. Nurses participate in one of the most extended and important phases, recovery. ICN believes that a significantly greater focus must be placed on recovery. As was seen with the Ebola outbreak, these events can destroy a country's health and social systems and reverse efforts to achieving the SDG targets. The Ebola outbreak has been a prime example of how tragedies have long-lasting and tragic effects on communities and their health systems. They create conditions such as lack of security and safety, lack of access to healthcare services, family separation, abuse, neglect, and exploitation, all which have long-term negative social impacts. ICN calls on countries to keep this top of mind when developing the recovery phase of national plans. Finally, management of public health events without disruption in healthcare service delivery cannot be achieved without a sufficient number of well-educated healthcare professionals. ICN urges WHO and governments to focus on longer-term health workforce planning and continuing education of health professionals as an initial step forward towards building resilient health systems. Thank you.
Thank you. Medicus Mundi International, and then finally International Baby Food Action Network.
Thank you. Medicus Mundi International would like to take this opportunity to address Agenda Item 3.3. This statement is supported by the People's Health Movement. WHO's draft 5-year global strategic plan to improve public health preparedness and response is guided by 12 principles. We welcome the focus on ensuring WHO's leadership and governance, community engagement, consultation, and focus on countries with greatest risk of emergencies and outbreak. We urge the WHO and member states to consider the implication of framing the issue of emergency preparedness as a health security issue. Such framing could advance a position that more developed nations should prioritize protection of their citizens from being affected by outbreaks in poor countries, rather than act in a spirit of solidarity towards affected countries. The strong focus on mobilizing domestic financing can result in an unfair burden on low and middle-income countries who face different opportunity costs due to their already fragile health systems and lack of human resources. The strengthening of IHR core capacities should be realized based on global financial solidarity. We are concerned that the only indicator proposed to assess the success of building and strengthening the international health regulation core capacities is the number of countries supported annually in the development or updating of their national action plans. We advocate for the incorporation of a target on global funding commitments. These should aim to strengthen health systems that address people's health needs and constitute the basis of an emergency response. We regret that WHO's contingency fund of emergencies has received only 45% of its planned $100 million funding as a consequence of tight earmarking of donor contribution. Finally, we are concerned by the rise of public-private partnership for global health security, such as the Global Health Security Agenda and the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation. These can potentially undermine WHO's leadership and confer undue influence to the private sector. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, sir. And the last speaker on my list today is International Baby Food Action Network.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As a global network that protects breastfeeding, IBFAN is pleased to comment on this important topic. Breastfeeding is a lifeline in emergencies. Babies are born with an undeveloped immune system and at greatest risk of water-related diseases, with diarrheal disease the second biggest killer of under fives. Breastfeeding provides both food, care, and immune support, and protects babies from the worst of emergency conditions. Despite this, all too often emergency responses are characterized by unsolicited donations of all manner of baby feeding products. Public appeals for funds often make this worse, with starving babies shown alongside the myths used by the baby food industry that women can't breastfeed because of stress or malnourishment. Rarely do appeals highlight the resilience of breastfeeding or that artificially fed babies face many more risks for survival. IBFAN's World Breastfeeding Trends Initiative assessment of policies and programs on infant feeding during emergencies shows that the implementation of UN recommendations on this is poor. WHO can play a key role in reversing this situation by promoting emergency preparedness protocols that protect breastfeeding and improve food security. The new updated operational guidance for emergency relief staff and program managers is designed to give all those working in emergencies concise, practical guidance on appropriate infant and young child feeding, and ensure that when breast milk substitutes are required, they're purchased, distributed, and used according to the UN's agreed strict criteria. Emergencies are prime opportunities for commercial exploitation, and the business of malnutrition is thriving. While the speedy delivery of products can be essential, Overemphasis on fortified products and quick-fix treatments of malnutrition, often traded globally and containing 25% sugar, can undermine breastfeeding and sustainable, local, biodiverse foods that are more culturally appropriate. We look forward to working with WHO to ensure that families in emergencies have the support and protection they need. Thank you.
Thank you, International Baby Food Action Network. With this, I do not have any other speaker on my list, and I don't see any member state, any EB member state or non-EB member state raising their flag. So in that case, I close the list of speakers and would request, we would have in the end of the session today of this agenda item, a right of reply by China, a short statement. We will come to that in the end. I would request now Ms. Harvey, member of the Independent Oversight and Advisory Committee, for her final comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director General, esteemed Member States, I'd like to thank you on behalf of IOC for the support of our report and recommendations, which we really appreciate. As Member States are aware, our work and our results framework come directly from document A69/30, which the Secretariat report to us on, which we supplement by our field visits and the further reports that we receive on the implementation of our recommendations. In fact, this weekend, IOC will be visiting Bangladesh and India. We thank the USA for its recommendations for future visits, which we need to examine within our programme for our future work. For our next report, we will continue to focus on progress on standard operating procedures and business process raised by most Member States, communication highlighted by the Dominican Republic and Iraq, HR, as highlighted by Germany, particularly the split between HQ regional office country offices, and strengthening the country offices and their close working with governments, as raised by India, Iraq, Turkey, and Zambia on behalf of the African region. Implementation of due diligence for FENSA and the importance of applying that across countries was raised by Zambia for the African region, which we fully agree with. Effective working with partners, which was highlighted by the UK, IHR implementation, including experience with development of national action plans, taking multi-sectoral and One Health approaches highlighted by Canada, Pakistan, Tanzania, and the need for tools to support implementation that Honduras and the Philippines referenced. Community engagement, which we referenced in our second report and was raised in comments by both Mexico and the IFRC, which we will continue to look at. Security raised by Canada, and most critically, the financing gap both for CFE and core funding, and the ability of country offices to raise local funding, which we agree is of critical importance for the success of the programme, as highlighted by Australia, Canada, Germany, Republic of Korea, and the United Kingdom. Regarding the question from the Netherlands and many other Member States on implementation of the recommendations made, I can assure you that IOC remains committed to ensuring that the Secretariat actions our recommendations, which we will continue to report on to the governing bodies. So far, IOC is satisfied that our recommendations are being taken seriously and actioned by the Secretariat, but we will continue to keep this under scrutiny. And lastly, we'd like to thank all those who have made our work possible. The governments who've hosted our missions in 2016-17, Colombia, Iraq, Mali, Nigeria, and Pakistan. The WHO Secretariat and various partners that we've also met and interviewed through our country visits. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Harvey. And now I'll give the floor to Dr. Peter Salama, Deputy Director General, Health Emergencies Programme, for his comments. Sir.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. With the permission of the Chair, I'll be a little longer today because I'll be covering the 3 reports and the 3 sets of questions associated with them. Let me start by thanking the Chair and members of the IOAC for their comprehensive report. As we reflect on 2017, the first full year of operation of the new program, it's clear WHE and its staff at headquarters, regional and country levels have been challenged and have been tested again and again. Some of the major operations included Ebola in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Marburg in Uganda, pneumonic plague in Madagascar, cholera, diphtheria and health system collapse in Yemen. As mentioned by the delegate from Nigeria yesterday, yellow fever, cholera, meningitis, Lassa fever, monkeypox, all in Nigeria, and led so well by the Nigerian Centre for Disease Control, a collaboration with which is becoming a model for our program. Natural disasters in Wipro and Americas, the Rohingya refugee crisis in Bangladesh, chemical events in Syria, war-related injuries in Iraq, and 9 major L3 crises, which is the largest ever faced by the United Nations system. This is by no means a comprehensive list, and nor does the report to the EB attempt to cover every crisis where our support is needed, as indicated by the delegate from Palestine yesterday. Indeed, the program is challenged daily by emerging issues and requests for support, such as becoming involved more systematically in addressing the needs of refugees in the Middle East, as indicated by the delegates of Jordan and Italy. Indeed, the program remains on constant alert, detecting 5,000 signals of public health threats every month and ultimately filtering these down to around 30 requiring a field investigation. As indicated by the IOAC, the systems and processes outlined in the emergency response framework and standardized to the extent possible and desirable across the regions are contributing to mission-critical responses that are saving lives and, in some cases, such as plague in Madagascar, protecting economies. However, as delegates from Bahrain, Pakistan, Iraq, India and Zambia emphasized yesterday, WHO cannot be limited to responding to every new event. This is why the program supports 5 major long-term strategies focused on prevention and preparedness. First, supporting long-term disease control strategies. In 2017, for example, we launched with the Global Task Force for Cholera Control the Roadmap to End Cholera by 2030, which addresses the UK's question on providing incentives to manufacturers to increase production, which rests largely on stimulating demand and a predictable market for a vaccine that is not included in regular EPI schedules. In fact, since the stockpile began to be supported by Gavi in 2013, we have already seen a 10-fold increase in supply of cholera vaccine, with 65 campaigns in 18 countries within this short period of time. In addition, the strategy for eliminating yellow fever was approved by the Gavi board last year, and this foresees protecting 1.4 billion people with the vaccine. As we speak, in Nigeria and Brazil, WHO is supporting those governments to conduct some of the largest vaccination campaigns against yellow fever in history. Second, strengthening IHR core capacities, an issue to which I'll return. Third, linking preparedness and core capacities to health system strengthening. As Japan indicated, this presents a critical nexus for bringing the twin GPW priorities of UHC and emergencies together, and we are already working very closely with the health systems team on this. Fourth, strengthening partnerships with an emphasis on building a massive emergency workforce, what Dr. Tedros calls the reserve army, at regional and country level. Turkey mentioned the Emergency Medical Team Initiative, and indeed we now have 85 emergency medical teams in the process of being officially classified by WHO. But WHO's leadership in the health cluster and convening role in GORN also brings the capacity of more than 300 additional partners to the table. New partners, such as Africa CDC, referenced yesterday, are also working closely with us and being deployed under a WHO umbrella in new crises. Fifth, as indicated by the Philippines, Colombia and the US, the program is now bringing research into the mainstream of our response through the R&D blueprint, which is successfully reducing the time needed for new products targeting high-threat pathogens to be available to those that most need them. While these foundations have now been built for the program, the IOAC has pointed to the next generation of issues that the program faces. Strengthening WHO's work at country level and its capacities, including for resource mobilization and communication, a central theme of the GPW, and the need to ensure fit-for-purpose business processes. These issues are consistent with those raised by the Independent Expert Oversight and Advisory Committee through its report to the PBAC last year corporately, and by our own after-action reviews. Several delegates asked about the standard operating procedures, and indeed, in human resources, procurement, delegation of authority, these have been drafted and formally incorporated into Chapter 7 of WHO's corporate e-manual. In addition, fast-track provisions are being developed for FENSA that combines the need for speed with the need to still conduct due diligence. Briefing and training of key target audiences such as WRs, key admin and management networks, administrative officers, the Global Service Centre staff began in 2017 and will continue in 2018. A variety of training and delivery mechanisms will be used including online, WebEx and face-to-face. The WHE Management and Administration Network in 2018 will conduct a review of the established SOPs on a monthly basis. However, as several delegates indicated, it is not desirable for WHE to develop parallel processes, particularly when issues such as security, staff welfare, supply chain management, and recruitment require corporate solutions. This is why these issues are now top priorities for the corporate-wide transformation agenda. The Netherlands, Germany, and many delegates asked about the financing picture and how it fits with other mechanisms such as the Pandemic Emergency Facility and SURF. Let me start by thanking the partners that supported the new program in 2016 and 17. The program attracted around $1 billion of donor support at headquarters, regional and country levels for that biennium. We thank the donors that contributed. However, the funding was mostly highly earmarked and short-term, meaning that we basically start from scratch for this new biennium. The concrete result of this is difficulty in retaining the capacities so difficult to build over the last 2 years at all levels of the program. The Afro region, for example, now has a strong team of more than 50 WHE staff working on the program around the clock and producing great results. A new financing model is clearly needed to sustain these capacities and this progress. With it, we will get even better results for you, the Member States. Canada and Japan asked about the contingency fund. The fund has supported more than 40 events in more than 30 countries, spending around $35 million US. In 80% of cases, money was transferred to WHO country offices within 24 hours of the request being made. You will recall that the Ebola outbreak in 2014 and 15 in West Africa cost the world at least $2 billion US in direct costs alone. In 2017, with support of WHO and the Contingency Fund, the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo controlled its Ebola outbreak for less than $2 million, 1/1000th of the cost. We believe the CFE is a global public good, and it is now almost depleted. In my view, it should be underwritten by long-term investment, and we have a strategy to do so. On SURF, it remains a critical donor for WHO and for the health sector as a whole, particularly for humanitarian crises. Every year, SURF is on the top 5 list of our humanitarian donors. However, SURF life-saving criteria mean that the SURF Secretariat is reluctant to fund outbreaks in their early stages until large-scale mortality has resulted. We find this policy counterintuitive and ethically challenging, and have raised it several times with OCHA leadership and the SURF Secretariat. On the Pandemic Emergency Facility, WHO co-chairs the initiative with the World Bank, and we find the insurance-based mechanism a very interesting one. However, PEF is confined and limited to 3 groups of viruses and can only be activated once the stringent thresholds have been reached. So it has not yet been actually used, and it's unlikely to be needed if we stop outbreaks early, as we've done in the majority of cases in the past year. On Yemen, the situation is catastrophic, and I'm responding to the UK's questions here, with concurrent outbreaks of cholera, diphtheria, malaria, and more to come, sadly, as the health system collapses entirely. Well, it's clear that with better surveillance, better access, and less politics, we may have been able to do more on cholera earlier. The team at country level, supported by the region and headquarters, has worked around the clock to deliver and to keep case fatality rates down well below international standards. As the needs spiral, Yemen has become one of the WHO's largest countries of operation, with budgets in excess of several $100 million a year. I think it's important to point out that the ultimate culpability for destroying the water and sanitation and health infrastructure of Yemen and blocking the deployment of health workers and life-saving supplies, including vaccines and antitoxins, rests with the warring parties and their international supporters. Cholera vaccine may help, but it's not a substitute for a peaceful solution. Having said that, one of the top priorities for my team this year is to document more thoroughly, through after-action reviews and lessons learned, how we can improve, and we'll be happy to share these lessons learned with you at mission briefings and other fora. Turning to the 5-year Global Strategic Plan, the document has benefited from an intense consultation process. It was on the official agenda of all 6 regional committee meetings, received significant feedback through the web consultation, and at the November consultation here in Geneva. Thailand, New Zealand, Fiji, Sweden, and others have mentioned the need to clarify the indicators further and align with the new GPW. We'll be suggesting a meeting of national focal points in early March on the proposed revisions to the self-assessment annual reporting tool, and can include other technical issues at that time, including further refining the deliverables and the indicators. On the point of Netherlands regarding the need for stronger analysis of capacity, given all the new data we have access to, we agree with this need and have included the issue as a priority for our 2018 work plan. On New Zealand's question regarding the advisory groups, yes, we have reviewed them, and we do plan to establish the National Focal Points community of practice using online technologies, not just meetings. And we're going to include some innovative developments, such as serious gaming technologies, in order to conduct simulations with the National Focal Points. On Brazil's important points, it's important to emphasize that the annual reporting tool and voluntary M&E instruments are not done for the sake of doing more assessments, but with the ultimate goal of supporting member states to develop, through their national action plans, a plan to address their gaps in core capacities. The goal is stronger capacities at country level as an integral part of health system strengthening and health sector plans. We agree entirely that funding should not be conditional on completing any one specific aspect of the assessments. In sum, together we have gone a long way in 18 months to realizing the DG's vision of making the world a safer place. As the current epidemiology of influenza, though, reminds us, in this 100th anniversary of the Spanish flu pandemic, the world may never be entirely safe. This is why WHO is needed and why we continue to need and rely on your support. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Salama, for summing up all the questions and responses. May I now request R.D. Emro to please take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to share with the honorable delegate the regional perspective on WHO work in health emergencies. Mr. Chairman, as host to some of the world's biggest emergency and oldest protracted crisis, the Eastern Mediterranean region carries the largest burden of people in need of aid. Out of a total of 140 million people in need of aid globally, 60% live in 14 countries in the region, directly or indirectly affected by emergencies. This year, Syria will enter in its 7th year of conflicts. As rightly highlighted by Dr. Peter Salama, Yemen health system is failing to the ongoing conflicts, the economic crisis, the cholera outbreak, and more recently, the reemergence of diphtheria. In other countries, ongoing military offensive continue to create a challenging environment to provide healthcare services in insecure and under-resourced setting. As a result, growing caseloads are observed of people requiring trauma care, treatment of communicable and non-communicable diseases and mental health disorders, maternal and child health care, as well as the requirement of population with special needs. Here, let me highlight the importance of health system resilience, Mr. Chairman. We need to invest in strengthening the national health system that are able to prevent and respond to emergency and outbreaks. Investing in health system strengthening is an investment in emergency preparedness and response, as they are two sides of the same coin. Mr. Chairman, the Eastern Mediterranean region also bears the greatest burden of displaced population, with more than 30 million displaced people across the region. The region also hosts the greatest number of internally displaced persons worldwide. Almost 80% of all people displaced in the regions live outside the camps, placing additional burden on vulnerable host communities. Demand on health services by displaced population continue to place a large burden on national health system across the region. Yesterday, we heard this message clearly from some of the member states who are generously hosting the displaced populations. Inaccessibility for security reasons remains a challenge in countries affected by conflicts. This affects delivery of needs of healthcare services as well as reach for immunization campaigns such as polio. Attacks on healthcare in the Eastern Mediterranean region continue in a number of countries, with more than 170 attacks reported from 5 countries in the region in the first 3 quarters last year, making up 80% of all reported attacks globally. Mr. Chairman, the establishment of the new emergency program 18 months ago brought more capacity, resources to our region, mainly to the priority countries, and the collaboration across the 3 levels of the organization is more effective and operational. But, as rightly highlighted by the IOC report, our work cannot succeed without proper administrative architecture and functioning SOPs across the organization. We are continuously reviewing the administrative system, the HR procedures, and business processes to ensure that they not hold back the potential of the emergency program to excel. Under the DG transformation agenda, we will continue to improve administrative operations, SOPs, and delegation of authority to address these challenges collectively. Mr. Chairman, within the spirit of the GPW 13, emergencies are not the work of one cluster or one program alone, and harmonization of emergency work beyond the emergency program is needed, involving the inclusion of all technical areas on global, regional, and country level is a key. And that is what we are determined to do collectively. Mr. Chairman, let me end by thanking all member states for their continued support to the WHO emergency program, not only in the emergency, in the governing body, but more importantly for their generous support to WHO work to serve those who are in need and for which WHO is the last resort. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Mahjoor. Before I give the floor to DG, I would request legal to come in with his comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to address the comment made by the distinguished representative of Palestine, who raised the question of terminology used in the Secretariat report, and in particular asked that the term occupied Palestinian territory be used. I wanted to assure the board that the terminology used in the report is in line with WHO practice and is consistent with the WHO style guide. For those of you who don't know, WHO style guide provides guidance on the language and terminology for all WHO information products, including reports to governing bodies, and it includes references as to how certain geographical locations should be described. This guidance is of a nature that needs to be reviewed frequently, and we are in the process of carrying out a review, and this will include the matter raised by the distinguished representative of Palestine. The approach we will take is to follow UN practice as closely as possible, subject to any guidance from WHO's own governing bodies. And this approach of ensuring that WHO aligns as far as practicable to UN practice will of course include how the term occupied Palestinian territories is used in WHO documents in future. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification, and I would now request DG to take the floor. Sir.
Thank you, Chair. With the permission of the Chair, I would like to do something unusual today to mark an exceptional contribution made by one of our senior directors to global health and to making the world safer. This is Dr. You know him, he's very known to you, Dr. Gunel Rodier. Can you rise up maybe to be seen? Dr. Gunel Rodier, as you know, has contributed to development of the international health regulation and to preparedness and response for most of his career. He is actually known as the father of IHR. I hope you will agree. And is a model of the service and commitment that we seek from our colleagues. Please join me in thanking him and congratulating him on his retirement in his excellent service. So he's retiring starting from April, and we wish him all the best, but until he leaves, we will exploit him properly. Thank you. And still he will continue to be part of the family. Thank you so much. I will say a few words on the other issues. First of all, one thing I would like to assure you is emergency preparedness and response, or health security, is very, very critical for WHO. And that's what you have, you have given us already the guidance. It was loud and clear. And Ebola's attack also made it really serious. So I think the message for us is, for the whole world, of course, saying never again. So we should do our best to really the same thing happen again. So we should really say never again. And for that, we have to invest our resource and energy. And in WHO, that's what we're doing. Emergency preparedness and response issue is a daily business. No single day passes in WHO now without the senior leadership, including myself, talking about emergency. I get daily briefing every single day, daily briefing. And I see what's happening globally. I have a great team which is led by Pete. They don't miss a day, actually. I get daily briefing. The first day I asked if they could help with that, they started. And no interruption. And I can see what's happening, be it Marburg, Ebola, and so on. So that's what we will continue to do. It's a daily business. And then we have instituted a WHO Health Security Council, which is co-chaired by both of us. And since we have started, it's a fortnightly meeting of the council. We had no interruption again. If I am around, I chair. If I'm not around, still either or we both chair when both of us are around. So we're making it very, very tight. Of course, I should thank Margaret Chan for the wonderful reform, actually, she did. We're building on it. One of the successful reforms is this, and credit to her, by the way. And we're building on it and making it even very tight. So this is a daily business, reminding us always that this is a daily business. As you know, not only health security and other security matters like terrorism, national security is a daily issue, actually. You have to seriously follow. You know the National Security Council, how it operates in your respective countries. And the same, this is a security issue. You know, during First World War, Spanish flu killed more than the First World War itself. So it's a serious matter, and it's 100th year, by the way, and we have to be very, very serious. And as what Pete said, I agree with him that we're still very vulnerable, and that's why investment in prevention, investment in early detection, and investment in responding swiftly is very important. But still, we're very, very vulnerable. When we visited Madagascar, that's what we have seen. Of course, it was controlled quickly. And Ebola was controlled in DRC quickly. And Marburg, the same thing. But please make no mistake that this is being done with all the vulnerabilities we have. Of course, it shows that we can do better from the past, but that cannot cover the vulnerability that we have. We have to admit that and believe that we are vulnerable, and we have more to do to really strengthen from prevention up to early detection and the swift response. But we have to also recognize the success which belongs to all of us. And the reason behind the Ebola or Marburg plague quick response was partnership at all levels. The government, partners at the country level, and also alignment of WHO at all levels, headquarters, region, and country, and the support of the donors. We can see that. But as what Pete said, one thing I would like to stress is on the contingency funding, it's now drying up because that was a symbol of partnership. Unless we continue to finance it, we're in trouble. We're in a problem. And we thank all countries and partners who have contributed to the contingency fund, but we have to sustain it because we have already seen good result. And as what Pete said, a 1 million or 2 million investment now will avert the deaths of many lives, and in addition to that, also avert the loss of resources, billions of dollars. Not willing to invest $1 million or $2 million today will result into the loss that we have seen during the attack of Ebola. So I think we have to learn from that. And as what Jim Kim says, there is this cycle of panic and neglect. When we panic, we give our best. Then when things seem okay, then we neglect it. Let's get out of this problem. Otherwise, we will again pay dearly. So we want you to think about the finance. The Independent Oversight Committee had also underlined the finance issue is very, very critical. very, very critical. And whatever money is coming is also, as has been said, it's very much earmarked, and at the same time, short term, even less than a year. You can't use this kind of contribution. It's over before even it comes. So the finance issue is very important, I think. And the symbol of partnership is also the financing. And we have to make progress on that. The other elements, as reported on the comments by the Oversight Committee on Finance, on delegation of authority, on business process, both recruitment and procurement delays, we have already started working on them. And we take the committee's recommendation very, very seriously. I will tell you one story. When we visited with Pete Yemen in July, our country office told us some of the commodities actually were received in Yemen after they no longer need them, because the procurement process is so long and very bureaucratic. That's why, as part of the transformation agenda, we are re-engineering all processes and making them as effective and as efficient as possible. So they will be not only in terms of speed, but also in terms of checks and balances to avoid any risks. We will do both. But we have to have processes that are responsive. You cannot fight when whatever you need to fight comes late. You know that you will be defeated. So in order to fight well, we need to have the processes, the support processes, to be very responsive. So we take that very seriously, and the other recommendations also. And there was one request, one question associated to that, how we are going to move forward with that. I think it's Herbert to ask this question. What we will do is we will incorporate it into our 2018 plan. We have already started working on it. And then part of it is part of the transformation. So we make sure that all the recommendations are implemented. The best way to implement remarks or recommendations from independent committees to prepare a plan and make sure that somebody is taking responsibility and also a deadline on when to do it, and at the same time, if it has cost implications, to resource it. So we will include it in our plan and make sure that it's implemented, because we fully agree with the recommendations of the committee. And I would like to use this opportunity actually to thank them for their hard work, dedication, and commitment. Please accept my respect and appreciation for that, and look forward to working with you closely to make our response, emergency preparedness and response, even better, and to make our world safer. Thank you so much.
Thank you, DG, for your comments. And now we have completed the loop, the initial briefing on these three papers, comments, questions, and responses. And we're in a position in which I can invite the Executive Board to consider the report, consider noting the reports, as well as consider the draft decision contained in Annex 2 of document EB 142/10. May I take that the Board is now ready to note the report contained in document EB 142/8? I see no objection. It is so decided. May I take that the Board is now ready to note the report contained in document EB 142/9? I see no objections again, so it is so decided. Now, is the Board now ready to consider the draft decision contained in Annex 2 of EB 142/10? So I see no objections. And having heard the discussion, I understand that the Board is now ready to adopt the draft decision contained in EB 142/10. The decision is therefore adopted. I'd like to use this. However, before closing this item, I would like to give the floor to China to exercise a right of reply. China, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Chinese delegation is now exercising the right of reply according to Rule 3 of the EB Rules of Procedure. During the meeting, Swaziland, USA, Nicaragua, Honduras, Haiti, El Salvador, and other countries made Taiwan-related remarks which are irresponsible. China is strongly against such remarks. China reiterates that Taiwan is part of China, and the Taiwan issue is China's internal affair. This is a broad consensus of the international community and recognized by the international laws. The World Health Organization is a specialized agency of the United Nations. The UN General Assembly Resolution 2758 and the WHA Resolution 25.1 provide legal basis for WHO to observe the One China principle. No one should make use of meetings of this organization to challenge this principle. The relevant countries made remarks which are serious violations against the resolutions of WHO and the United Nations and are also irrelevant to the agenda items of this meeting. The Chinese delegation hopes the relevant countries to strictly observe the rules and principles of this organization in the subsequent meetings. China reiterates that for Taiwan's participation in the activities of international organizations, China's position is unequivocal and consistent. That is, such participation must be a rational and sound arrangement following the One China principle and made upon cross-strait consultations. From 2009 to 2016, Taiwan's participation in the World Health Assembly is indeed a special arrangement made by the two sides following the One China principle. China advises the relevant countries to earnestly honor the One China principle and immediately stop their interference into China's territorial sovereignty. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, China. I see there is there's a member state who wants to speak. If it is on item 3.3, the agenda item has been, the list of speakers has been closed.
Россия просто хочет поддержать заявление председателя.
Yes, I would simply like to support the declaration made by China regarding the need to rigorously respect the items that are on the agenda.
Thank you very much, but as I mentioned earlier, the list of speakers has been closed unless there's some specific point of order. So we'll close this agenda item and move on to the next one. That is agenda 3.4, but before that, let me share with the ladies and gentlemen of the board about a situation which we are in, and that is about time management. We have had more than 100 interventions on day one, and another about 114 interventions on day two by the member states, non-member states, and non-state actors and others. We are in day 3, and we are still at the agenda item number 3.4, and we have a lot to cover to be finished by Saturday so that all of us can go home. Now, we have 2 or 3 options. First option is that we start having evening and night sessions. So I have discussed with Secretariat, they are ready to sit till midnight. So we can add a couple of sessions every day, starting from today, for next 2 or 3 days. But we have decided not to be that harsh on ourselves. There are 2 suggestions if the member states and the board members agree. I've made some calculations regarding the interventions which we have been having from different member states. If we reduce the salutations and the initial and last comments, we save about 20 to 30 seconds from each 3-minute intervention. And actually, that comes up to a reduction of about 50 to 60 minutes if it is counted for every day. If we go a little further and strive to complete our interventions in the green light period, that would save us 1.5 hours if the average interventions per day is 100 plus. So if we voluntarily reduce the salutations and a bit of retweaking of our interventions, which we have, to 2 minutes, we would be able to wriggle out of those extra sessions, which, if we don't have any other option, we would have to go into those. So may I suggest very humbly that we review our respective interventions and try to reduce at least 40 to 60 seconds from each of those. So what I would suggest is, and if everybody agrees, that we would not announce extra sessions today till the end of the day and see how it goes. And then by the end, we would be in a better position to understand that how many extra sessions are required. If that is agreeable, I would only suggest to extend the evening session till 7:30 today with a good 15-20 minutes break in which we are assured that there would be fruit available for us, as well as we'll have some exercise as well. So if that's the case, we'll hear from Thailand and then we'll decide. Sir.
Chair, for your kind suggestion. We strongly support that. Thailand has limited our intervention to 2 minutes since 2 years ago in the EB and the VHA. And with your suggestion, we will reduce it further, maybe to 1:45 or 1:30 minutes. Thank you.
I greatly appreciate that. And so let's see how it goes today. And I will come back to the agenda item 3.4, which is about polio transition planning, contained in document EB 142/11. The board is invited to note the report and to consider the draft decision contained in document EB 142/11, paragraph 84. The financial and administrative implications of this draft decision, should it be adopted, are contained in document EB 142/11, addendum 1. I now open the floor for discussion and comments. We start with Malta, to be followed by Congo. Sir, you have the floor, and you have to set a precedence.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's difficult for me to set the precedence because I'm speaking on behalf of a number of member states, and cutting down on a statement which has been agreed is rather difficult. I have the honour to speak on behalf of the European Union, its member states. The candidate countries Turkey, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, Montenegro and Albania, the country of the stabilisation and association process and potential candidate Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as Ukraine, the Republic of Moldova and Georgia aligned themselves with the statement. We thank the DG for his report on polio transition planning, informing us about the elaboration of the Strategic Action Plan on Polio Transition that will be presented to the 71st World Health Assembly in May, due to decision WHO 70(9)9. The EU and its member states welcome this report and appreciate it for its professional quality. As to its contents, we have the following comments. Our first and major concerns are the financial implications of polio transition and the information about it. We agreed in the World Health Assembly 70 decision for WHO to produce a detailed costing for the Strategic Action Plan. It will be essential for WHO to provide comprehensive and accurate information as soon as possible on the costs as well as the implications on budget and HR planning of polio transition. We deem it to be evident that overall costs for addressing polio and keeping the world polio-free should clearly decrease in the years to come after interruption has been achieved. As this has not been clarified by the final version of the Strategic Action Plan and accompanying detailed costing, we would like to express our concerns about paragraphs 6 and 7 of the draft decision contained in the report, which deal with budgetary aspects like, and I quote, a revision of budget ceilings for the biennium 2020-2021 and additional financial resources, unquote. Although we support the main thrust of the remaining paragraphs and the draft decision as such. Secondly, we request the Secretariat to include in the Strategic Action Plan also appropriate measures to capture, document and disseminate the lessons learned from the Global Polio Eradication Initiative and from polio eradication itself. Thirdly, we would like to emphasize that both increased WHO leadership as well as the continued political commitment of all governments involved will be essential to make polio transition a success. Fourthly, the Strategic Action Plan should, in our view, also include significant information on the country transition plans, including their status quo, the progress achieved so far, and supportive measures taken by WHO to assist the countries concerned where necessary in elaborating and finalizing these plans. We consider the risks of mismanaging polio transition as truly significant for the health systems of all member states, as well as for WHO itself and its reputation. Finally, we would like to thank both the Independent Monitoring Board as well as the Transition Independent Monitoring Board for their excellent work. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, the Honourable Delegate from Malta. We would give the floor to Congo, followed by Bahrain. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congo is speaking on behalf of the 47 member states of the African region of the World Health Organization. The member states, first and foremost, I'd like to congratulate the WHO and its partners for the efforts deployed to eradicate poliomyelitis in the African region December of 2017. Well, some 16 months had gone by ever since the last case of polio, of the wild virus, but there are some localized weaknesses in surveillance, especially in high-risk areas, those hard hit by conflicts or that are inaccessible. There we exclude the possibility that the polio virus has continued to circulate without being detected. There have been some outbreaks, nonetheless, with a derivation from a vaccine. Planning and transition is a high priority in the African region in compliance with the strategic plan for poliomyelitis and also the phase for 2017-2018. And in the wake of all of this, African region has finalized their plan for the fight against polio for the entire period 2016-2019. We've already begun implementation last year. The planning and transition of polio is a focus of in-depth discussions by the Ministries of Health. It has been the case since 2015. This is an item that is on the agenda of all regional meetings in the region with the office heads and has been the case ever since 2015. The same item is also on the advisory group meetings as well. Also, there's a lot of funding by the Worldwide Initiative for the eradication of polio. They have developed some plans also with figures, quantification. Their other priority plans are at the final phase of developing their transition plans. All the countries in the region that have minimum infrastructure for the fight against polio have finalized the updating of their mapping for 2017. The transition planning structure also is providing for a transition. There will be a further reduction also of funding for health plans. So we're highly concerned by the fact that the reduction of staffing for the planning of the transition, that this is making it necessary for a number of countries to face a financial crisis. This may also challenge some of the commitments for vaccination. So it's of primordial importance that the governments, the WHO, and the various stakeholders do not in any way slow down their efforts in order to assure the eradication of polio and see to it that the transition plan is successful in Africa. So the African region would like to call upon the board to take note of this report. Thank you.
I would request the honourable delegate from Bahrain to please take the floor, which would be then followed by the delegate from Zambia. You have the floor, madam.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we have taken note of the Stockholm 14211 polio transition planning in the Kingdom of Bahrain. We support all the efforts that seek to finalize the strategic action plan and the action plan for priority countries. Also, we'd like to say that it's indispensable to implement these plans as soon as possible. Also, looking at the post-certification plan for the elimination of polio in order to make sure that we have a polio-free world. We are in favor of the draft decision that is in this document. First of all, we need to present a detailed action plan for transition planning, and this in compliance with the priorities that are set forth in the third Global Plan of Work, 13th Global Plan of Work, and also draw upon the lessons gleaned from earlier activities and experience during polio eradication. We should also support the member states to make sure that they can implement and tend toward the SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you, respected delegate from Bahrain. Zambia, you have the floor, which would then be followed by Libya.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Zambia supports the statement made by Congo on behalf of the Africa region. Mr. Chairman, the decision from the 70th session of the World Health Assembly of May 2017 called for the identification of the assets and capacities, especially at country level, required to maintain a polio-free world after eradication and sustain the progress on other programmatic areas that may be negatively impacted by the scaling down of the polio eradication infrastructure. For a considerable time, the polio infrastructure in Zambia has played a significant role in strengthening surveillance, planning for vaccination campaigns, and disease outbreak responses. For example, Zambia is in the middle of a cholera outbreak, and some of the polio infrastructure have been utilized for surveillance and control of the outbreak. Also, we've used the National Polio Laboratory in capacity building and confirmation of pathogens other than polio, such as measles. Mr. Chairman, therefore, Zambia welcomes the new WHO vision to use polio transition planning to provide support in increasing access to quality healthcare services and medicines, including vaccination towards universal health coverage, support in responding to disease outbreaks and health emergencies, and support for health-related SDGs such as maternal and child health and selected diseases. Additionally, Zambia supports the post-polio certification strategies to sustain the polio essential functions necessary to ensure a polio-free world. I thank you.
Thank you, Zambia. Libya, you have the floor, which would be followed by Japan.
Thank you, Chairman. I speak on behalf of the member states of the Eastern Mediterranean region. The member states of the Eastern Mediterranean region are appreciative of the Secretariat's attention to the pressing priority of strategic transitioning of significant polio assets, functions, and knowledge to benefit other public health initiatives. We are fully aware of the significant programmatic and organizational risks associated with polio budget ramp down and the opportunities that could be created with timely and robust transition planning in the priority countries. All member states recognize the importance of sustaining polio essential functions, particularly in endemic and at-risk countries, to complete the job of eradication and ensure a polio-free world beyond global certification. We also note the reliance on polio infrastructure and staff to support other urgent health interventions, particularly in high, vulnerable, fragile, and conflict-affected member states, and the difficulties for some states to absorb capacities and assets into their national health systems. We are encouraged to see progress made in the development of a draft strategic framework that will underpin a comprehensive polio transition action plan to be presented at the 7th First World Health Assembly. We are also encouraged to note that WHO's 13th General Program of Work will include a tailored and tiered approach to polio transition planning based on country context. It is imperative that the skilled human resources, experience, and lessons learned through 28 years of global polio eradication initiatives be optimally utilized to support member states in improving immunization, responding to outbreaks and emergencies, contributing to global health security, improving maternal and child health, and attaining universal health coverage to achieve sustainable development goals. Mr. Chairman, realizing the importance of careful transition planning, the member states of the Eastern Mediterranean region, one, are committed to support the transition process in the countries of the region. Two, commend the Director General for placing polio transition planning among the organization's chief priorities and encourage further ongoing support to implement the process in priority and at-risk countries. Three, commit to reviewing the progress and challenges of polio transition in great detail in our regional committee meeting in October 2018. In summary, we endorse the proposed draft decision and strongly support robust polio transition planning, not only to mitigate the risks associated with polio budget ramp down, but also to increase capacities to achieve other important global public health goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Libya. Before giving the floor to Japan, we would take a pause as Japan has some suggested amendments, which I would request the Secretariat to distribute among the members. And then we'll ask Japan to take the floor. Is that good, sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To save time, I would like to start from making national statement first. Is it acceptable? And that will meet your expectation. Very short. We have 3 quick points. Number 1, polio transition team, we welcome. Second, we need to be careful in judging timing of eradication because local security is very difficult to make this assessment. Third point is that the importance of partnership on the ground in prevention of the epidemics of polio. National statement. So I think you are happy.
Wonderful. I am excited.
But, Mr. Chair, may I just introduce a little bit substance of proposed amendment, if I may. We worked hard and on behalf of our MLO EB members, Canada, Monaco, Norway, Panama, and the United States of America, we came to this amendment. We appreciate the work of the Secretariat and encourage further work to finalize a strategic plan which was requested by the last World Health Assembly decision. By this, we'll be able to make informed decision on Program Budget 2020-21, which enables us to maintain polio essential function and sustain progress in other programmatic areas. This is the reason why we would like to propose amendment to the decision point as you have now in front of you. The major points are we are proposing to modify the first paragraph and add new paragraph 3, deleting paragraphs 6 and 7, and to move paragraph 4 with modification and add new paragraph 7. So that is, in essence, the paper is about. Finally, we would like to express our surprise and concern about the fact that the document on financial implications entitled EV 142/11 at 1 was just published yesterday. I hope this amendment will enjoy your support from my distinguished EB members. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, Japan. May I now request Bahrain to take the floor? No, it's Canada to kindly take the floor, to be followed by Dominican Republic.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Director General and the WHO team for their work on polio eradication. Canada welcomes the report of the Director General providing the key components of a strategic action plan on polio transition planning, and we do look forward to receiving the full plan, including detailed costing of the polio-funded capacities and assets at the 71st WHA. Cognizant of the significant impact of polio transition on WHO as an organization, we welcome the recent progress on transition planning, including the establishment of a polio transition planning and management team. We continue to encourage senior-level prioritization of transition planning, coupled with appropriate staffing and budget support for this team so that the corporate planning for transition can continue without delay. Canada does request clarification from WHO on the additional resource requirements for polio transition in order to better understand the justification for this at this late stage in the process. We recall decision points EB 144 and WHA 79, in which transition planning was then identified as a priority for member states, referencing WHO's responsibility to carefully manage the transition and the implications of it. We welcome the work carried out by GPI to develop the draft post-certification strategy. It will guide our understanding of the essential functions required to sustain polio eradication at all levels, global, regional, and country. And we look forward to receiving further details on the associated costs, roles, governance, and accountability for the implementation of the strategy. We urge that budget planning for the biennium 2021 fully and clearly reflect the WHO financing requirements associated with sustaining polio essential functions, as well as sustaining programmatic areas that are currently dependent on polio funding. And we further wish to see these costs reflected in the financing plan for the 13th General Program of Work from 2019 to 2023. Country transition planning needs to be guided by the polio essential functions that are outlined in the draft post-certification strategy, and the associated costs and accountability need to be identified. And for that reason, we urge governments in all countries receiving polio funding to continue to finalize and improve their national transition plans as early as possible, because we believe country ownership, domestic resource mobilization, and integration of polio essential functions within existing structures and priorities at the country level are key to ensuring that our achievement of the eradication will be sustained. And so with those points in mind, Chair, Canada is pleased to support the amended decision points that have been tabled by Japan. And finally, let me reiterate Canada's resolve to achieving eradication and emphasize that our transition efforts must be carried out with eradication as the primary objective. It's an integral part of our commitment to the realization of the health, rights, and empowerment of women and children. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Canada. I would request Dominican Republic to take the floor, to be followed by Algeria.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. There's a bit of a paradox because eradicating a specific disease could endanger the financing of a number of interventions that seek to prevent other diseases. And we see this as part of a change along a change of diseases. Who would say that we're so close with mapping, working on a pathology that has given rise to a lot of incapacity, so much suffering, that this could undermine immunization programs, especially in the poorest of countries, distinguished member states of the executive board of the WHO? We have an opportunity here to focus on the various dangers brought about by the extreme specialization of funds for health actions. This is a duty that we are shouldering now. We see that there are countries that are using only one dose of the anti-polio vaccine, and also they have the bivalent oral type, but there is the proposal to fraction the vaccine. This has shown efficiency in some cases, but this is maintained because of the production of the inactivated vaccine. In virtue of this, we think it would be prudent to suggest that our Director General call upon the various projects for the production of all of the vaccines that are sure and efficient. This is very important to comply with our second objective, mitigate the danger of the re-emergence of polio, because we want to make sure that we do not lose the achievements that we were able to glean. So we accept the implementation of health plans after certification, but we have to guarantee that the budget funding is present, so that we can carry out the activities that are earmarked in the plan. So the funding must be there. Thank you.
Thank you. Algeria, to be followed by Iraq.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. Algeria wishes to associate itself with the statement made by Congo, speaking on behalf of the African region on this particular agenda item. Our delegation is concerned as to the impact that accelerated polio transition might have in terms of quality of response and the efficiency of health systems that are heavily dependent on polio health personnel who have been mobilized as part of the global initiative for the eradication of polio. We believe, therefore, that we need to think about the most appropriate ways and means of ensuring that there can be appropriate reallocation of human resources. In doing this, we need to take due account of the need to ensure sustainable and predictable financing, and this includes financing for the post-certification phase. Algeria supports the proposal that we keep on the agendas of WHO governing bodies this issue for 2018-2020. That is to say, the issue of polio transition planning and post-certification. Keeping this matter on the agenda would require submission of appropriate technical reports indicating progress made in this area. The delegation of Algeria wishes to commend the outstanding job of work done by AFRO, the regional office, and we also commend the commitment of African countries to eradicate this disease despite the many other health priorities that we have within our region. In conclusion, we support adopting the proposed draft decision as it stands within the document, and we are open to any discussion as to the amendments proposed by Japan. Thank you.
Thank you, respected delegate from Algeria. And now we will go to Iraq, to be followed by Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Really, we want this polio transition plan as an important plan to focus on the following points. The first one, that plan ought to be integrated with upgrading of other programs, taking into consideration integrated approaches at country level. Secondly, that plan ought to be tailored according to the country priorities and with epidemiological, demographic, and field renewals. Thirdly, that to be integrated with emergency crisis and catastrophe preparedness and response. Fourthly, that plan ought to focus on holistic capacity building at level of personnel and institutional, thus upgrading capacity building as a whole. Investing that plan for better health and universal health coverage with equality tenets. Fifthly, incorporating that plan within primary health care concepts with focusing on family health evidence-based practices. Sixthly, making that plan as impetus for sustainable development goals and targets at country level. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you, Iraq. Pakistan, you have the floor, to be followed by Mexico.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Pakistan notes the report and the draft decision contained in it. Pakistan at large is integrally engaged in the elimination of the wild polio virus 1. At large and integrally means how much the country has come together in that fight and how authorities have transcended all administrative, political, constitutional, geographical, and technical boundaries and overcome their challenges with an unprecedented reduction in polio incidence by more than 90% since the last outbreak in 2014. Polio program in our country has demonstrated steady progress towards the interruption of virus transmission. There is a strong evidence that the program supported other activities resulting in health benefits, including health system strengthening, outbreak investigation of other vaccines, preventable diseases, and vaccine logistics. As Pakistan moves towards eradication, it becomes critical to document and transition the knowledge, lesson learned, assets, and infrastructure accumulated by the program. This goal of polio legacy transition planning is to sustain a polio-free Pakistan and to ensure that years of investment in polio eradication contributes to the delivery of a better public health care delivery system in the country. The government will be directly involved in not just transition planning, but financial decision making and timelines for an orderly and responsible transition. Three main aspects would be considered for the country: maintaining and mainstreaming essential activities required to sustain wild polio virus eradication. Number two, ensuring that the knowledge generated and lessons learned are documented and shared. Number three, transitioning the processes, capacities, and assets to support other health priorities. As planned, Pakistan discussions will be starting in 2018, and the planning for polio legacy transition is expected to start in the first quarter of 2019. We have been stating that polio transition can only start with a finished polio elimination agenda in the remaining endemic countries. This is common sense, but it is no less nonsensical to recognize that polio transition could be even more successful if it seeds itself on these assets while they are fully in use. To add a transition target to the elimination one would keep the momentum we need for a program to succeed on both. Lastly, it is indeed imperative for us to recognize the need to preserve the unprecedented assets the polio program has built in Pakistan, not only to maintain polio forever away, but also to make our more than 200 million citizens safer from illness and healthier overall. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Pakistan. Mexico, you have the floor, to be followed by Tanzania.
Gracias, señor presidente. México considera que el
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, for Mexico, having a strategic plan for polio transition is something that can only be of benefit to all member states. This is something that can help member states to maintain progress in many areas: surveillance, health systems, resilience, and also early warning and preparedness for outbreaks, as well as maintenance of essential capacity, as foreseen under the IHRs. So we believe then that this can only be beneficial for all of us. We intend then to undertake sustainable planning through a process that will allow us to identify standards and essential technical functions that will be required in future in order to keep the world free of polio. We must ensure that key functions relating to polio eradication are maintained even beyond the point where, in fact, the goals of the global initiative have been achieved. As we see it, coordinated planning for funding in particular is essential. We need to have appropriate long-term budgeting, and this is something that can allow us to achieve the results we hope for in many areas. We support the amendments that have been put forward by Japan and other co-sponsors to the decision prepared by the Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you, Mexico. Tanzania, followed by the delegate from Philippines.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tanzania aligns itself with the statement made by Congo, the Republic of Congo, on behalf of the 47 African member states, but also on statements that were made by Zambia and Algeria in that context. Over nearly 3 decades, the polio eradication initiatives have established a significant impact in Africa in terms of the large trained workforce, a strong surveillance system for operational data collection and monitoring with dedicated staff and laboratories. Also, a stronger vaccine supply chain and services delivery as close as possible to a vast majority of people that have not previously been reached. In this effort, Mr. Chairman, within our country, for instance, we've been enabled to maintain administrative national routine immunization coverage of OPV3 of over 90% for the last 5 years. Polio-funded infrastructure and personnel have supported activities beyond polio, and these has included prompt detection and response to outbreaks such as cholera, measles, and pandemic flu due to H1N1 virus. We recommend WHO and all partners not to consider efforts so gained in carrying the advocacy mobilization of resources to sustain the pace. We appreciate the work in progress so far done, which provides the key components of the strategic plan and its alignment with the 13 General Program of Work 2019-2023, and are comfortable with the amendments that have been suggested by Japan. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Tanzania. May I now request the respected delegate from Philippines and then Thailand.
Good morning, and thank you, Chair. Philippines expresses its appreciation to the Secretariat for this report. Specifically, we welcome the draft post-certification strategy, urging all member states to take appropriate measures to ensure that their short and long-term health sector plans reflect the need to sustain the polio essential functions necessary to ensure a polio-free world. Further, we wish to raise the following concerns. On Goal 2 on protect populations, We note that there may be problems with supply of inactivated polio vaccine after bivalent OPV withdrawal, as we already experienced this problem after IPV introduction. Hence, we recommend for the transition plan to include specific strategies to ensure sustained supply of IPV, as well as contingency plan strategies should global shortages occur. We express the need for WHO continuing technical assistance in the development, updating, and monitoring of polio transition plans and the polio endgame plan of countries as necessary and as required. Lastly, we are open to discussion on the draft amendments being proposed by Japan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Philippines. Thailand, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. First, Thailand commits to the proposed Goal 1. With appropriate and acceptable implementation modality, we will not keep the virus in any of our laboratories. Second, we must learn from smallpox eradication. We must make sure that member states will not have to pay high price to stockpile new polio vaccines for possible reemergence. We request that the last sentence of Goal 2 should include affordable, to read, providing access to safe, effective, and affordable vaccines. Third, we express our concern over surveillance capacity in the post-certification period, especially in high-risk and inaccessible areas. We urge member states to invest enough resources to strengthen surveillance system to ensure that the world is truly free of polio. Chair, we express our sincere concern on the situation of inadequate information on non-staff members and event volunteers. Like the 2 heroines we have just lost, WHO should strengthen internal monitoring of non-staff members and volunteers. Staff, non-staff, or volunteers, we should take care of our frontline workers in an equitable manner. Finally, Thailand prefers to see a very short decision of the EB. If needed, only para 5 and 6 of the proposed draft decision that focus on procedural issues. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Thailand. I see no EB members keen for intervention. So we'll move on to non-EB members for their precise, brief, and within time interventions. I would request Monoko to please take the floor, which would then be followed by the delegate from Bangladesh. Monoko, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I'll try to be as brief as possible. The Kingdom of Morocco has for many years been committed to the Global Polio Eradication Initiative. We have always supported the idea that the polio eradication program was one that had ramifications going beyond eradication of polio itself. And this is something that has just been recalled by the delegate of Tanzania. I'm saying all of this to indicate why we pushed so hard in May, and I thank those who supported us, to get a decision adopted. The decision was to ensure that a transition planning system be established. We would have liked to have seen more progress in the area of strategic planning, but we welcome what has been done, because we recognize that what has been done has been undertaken in order to ensure that WHO does not end up facing a serious systemic risk in the near future. We would urge everyone to continue to work along these lines. And we also urge everyone to discuss, in particular, the post-certification strategy within the initiative to which WHO is a part. We fully support what has been said by Japan, and indeed also what was said by Monaco. Further, we endorse the comments made by Canada. Like Japan, I would like to express some considerable surprise about the financial and administrative consequences document submitted to us. In all of the discussion I have had thus far, we were talking rather about reallocation of staff rather than new staff for the transition team, the polio transition team. So we are surprised to see what we see in the document. We're surprised by the amounts, and we'd like to hear them being justified. They seem very high to us. In procedural terms, I'd also point out that we got this document yesterday, whereas a discussion on transition was supposed to take place yesterday, and that again is a cause for considerable surprise. Thank you.
Thank you, Monako. Bangladesh, you have the floor, to be followed by Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me the floor. I'll solely focus on the status of polio transition plan in Bangladesh. The polio program in Bangladesh has never been a vertical program, and as such, transitioning of the program began in the early 2000s. We anticipate that the polio transition plan in Bangladesh would be finalized by December 2018. Bangladesh's overall strategy for transition of polio essential functions is that the government would take over the functions in 2023. To this effect, Bangladesh is thankful to the Gavi Alliance for its support in covering the funding gap, particularly resulting from the GPEI funding ramp down until 2022. At this point, we wish to underline 4 key points that are proposed to be implemented to adequately maintain the polio essential functions. First, containment. 8 labs identified with potentially infectious materials would maintain biosafety level 2 and destroy all unneeded materials. Second, immunization. Routine polio vaccination with BOPV and FIPV, and where appropriate, polio NIDs would be continued without loss of quality to ensure high level of population immunity. Third, surveillance. Maintaining AFP surveillance, lab support, data management, outbreak response, and environmental surveillance. And finally, applying the experience and lessons learned from the past to remain polio-free. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Bangladesh. We have Russian Federation to be followed by Togo. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Chair. The Russian delegation would like to thank WHO for the work that has been done on strategic planning for polio transition. However, we note that the document that has been submitted contains only basic elements for a strategic plan of action, and it requires further work. We support the need to develop national plans for polio transition, and we support the goals that are formulated within the document. Achievement of those goals is necessary in order to secure a polio-free world. We consider that it is appropriate for WHO to provide differentiated support to member states, with particular emphasis on countries that have limited resources. Alongside that, we also note that within the document there's a lack of clarity on a number of issues, in particular relating to what countries are supposed to do prior to certification. There are also some questions as to the justification for the duration of vaccination, surveillance, ratification of substitutes to bivalent OPV, as well as other post-certification activities. In the view of the Russian delegation, in preparing a strategic action plan, we need to bear in mind lessons learned in 2016 when transitioning from trivalent to bivalent OPV. At that time, risks had clearly been underestimated with reference to the global deficit of IPV vaccines and problems with surveillance. In general, we support the draft decision for the EB on this issue, including the Japanese amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, Russian Federation. We have now Togo, which would be followed by Italy. Togo, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Togo wishes to congratulate the Secretariat on the work done, and we support the statement made here by Congo, speaking on behalf of the African region. Polio transition planning is something that is very much in line with the strategic programs, strategic objectives within the 13th Global Programme of Work. We welcome the strategic planning for polio transition, which focuses on maintaining essential capacity in accordance with the IHRs as adopted in 2005. We know that health systems, vaccination are particularly important. We need to do a great deal in this area if it is actually to be successful, and this involves dialogue involving country offices and ministries of health. We support the post-certification strategy to keep a polio-free world, that is to say, following eradication. But we also recognise that gradually countries must be assisted to mobilise domestic resources alongside external funding if they are to achieve that goal. We wish also to express support then for the contents of the document and the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Togo. Italy, you have the floor, to be followed by United States of America. Italy, you wish to speak now, or should we defer your statement?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Italy thanks the Secretariat for the report and strongly supports the action moving towards the eradication of polio and polio transition planning. Moreover, Italy supports the amendment proposed by Japan and other countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Italy. United States of America, you have the floor, to be followed by Iran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The United States appreciates the work of WHO to plan for polio transition. We support amendments to the decision point suggested by Japan and look forward to work on the draft strategy to assure a successful transition. We align with the statements of Canada and Monaco. As transition planning moves forward, the financial realities surrounding nearly 20% of WHO's budget potentially disappearing should not be forgotten. The U.S. suggests future reports address the financial and institutional challenges of polio transition, especially regarding human resources. Transition plans for WHO and member states should account for those polio-related functions detailed in the post-certification strategy. These activities need to continue after wild poliovirus is eradicated to maintain a polio-free world focused on containment, protecting populations through immunization, and capacity for detection and response. Polio transition planning provides WHO with a unique opportunity to work with countries to integrate surveillance, laboratory, and risk communication systems to meet needs for the next decade and beyond. Transition planning provides an opportunity to maintain best practices across countries as well as with WHO. While polio transition planning is important, we must stay focused on the goal of interrupting transmission of wild poliovirus and addressing a polio-free world. The U.S. looks forward to working with the Director General, member states, and other interested partners on polio transition. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, USA, Iran, and then Nigeria.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We note with appreciation the report by the DG on the polio transition planning and wish to highlight the following 3 points. First, importance of first completing polio eradication. As the only country in the world that is bordering the most polio-infected areas of the last 2 polio-endemic countries, Iran would like to first emphasize the importance of completing polio eradication. Iran would like to that the Executive Board and Member States should be fully focused on eradication. While transition planning is very important, Iran is deeply concerned that there is more discussion about stopping the polio program than stopping the polio virus. Eradication is not guaranteed, and the risk of failure increases with every day that polio continues to circulate in Afghanistan and Pakistan. This is a public health emergency. The board's deliberations on polio must be focused on successfully completing this task and finding new solutions to the chronic challenges in the last infected areas. Secondly, importance of transition planning in the context of the draft GPW 13. While Iran strongly emphasizes that the world's emphasis should first be on stopping the remaining polio transmission, Iran agrees that polio transition planning should move forward as the second priority. Transition planning for the polio staff, assets, and experience should now be in the context of the draft GPW 13 and the 3 new strategic priorities of WHO. Iran believes that rather than close down the polio program when it is completed, some of the key WHO polio staff and assets should be transitioned in the context of GPW 13 to help strengthen surveillance, immunization, and other basic services, and where appropriate, emergency readiness and response in priority countries. And third, special importance of having a longer time horizon for transition planning in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Iran is concerned that the time horizon for transition planning is too short. We have seen how long it takes to eradicate polio in difficult situations, and the risk of polio resurgence months or years after we thought it was stopped. This is especially the case in insecure areas, as happened in northeast Nigeria just a few years ago. Donors, partners, and member states must plan to support Afghanistan and Pakistan and their polio infrastructures for at least 5 years after the last reported virus if we are to be sure that the virus has been stopped and that transition can safely go forward. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, respected delegate from Iran. I would request Nigeria to take the floor, to be followed by Ethiopia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First, Nigeria aligns with the Afro-region statement by Congo. Nigeria has made a significant progress in polio eradication as a result of the intensive works of the federal government of Nigeria, state, local government, and partner agencies. The country did not record any case of white polio virus in 2017. Nigeria has embarked on aggressive polio case surveillance, outbreak responses in high-risk and security-compromised areas, as well as where circulating vaccine-derived polio virus cases in the northeast Sokoto axis were detected. And Nigeria is aware, and we know that we have a lot of investments in the country as a result of the polio eradication initiative, and we are therefore willing to absorb the investments. In order not to lose any of the investments, the polio transition planning process is currently underway in Nigeria at the highest level amongst different sectors. And finally, we are also in support of the amendment by Japan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nigeria. Ethiopia, you have the floor, and then we'll listen to Sudan.
Thank you, Chair. The Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia aligns itself with the statement made by the Republic of Congo on behalf of the African region. Ethiopia would like to appreciate the Secretariat for the report containing key elements of the Strategic Action Plan on Polio Transition. We would also like to give credit for WHO Regional Office and the Regional Director for the level of commitment in supporting Member States on this specific agenda. Ethiopia is among the 7 countries in the African region where 85% of polio resources are allocated. The polio assets in Ethiopia contributed to the health system, especially in strengthening the routine immunization program and enhancing surveillance capacity. Ethiopia has secured a polio-free status in 2017. Ethiopia believes that polio transition should be smooth and efficient. The transition should therefore aim beyond scaling down polio resources and benefit sustainability of results. Ethiopia supports elements of the strategic action plan contained on the report, including the post-certification strategy. As Ethiopia is identified as one of few countries facing the most reduction of positions. We call for the Director General to ensure that the transition process in WHO country offices to be optimal and transparent. With this, in conclusion, Ethiopia notes the reports and encourages the Executive Board to endorse the draft decision, including the amendment by Japan. Thank you.
Sudan and then Norway. You have the floor, sir.
Sudan supports Ember statement presented by Libya and commends the efforts exerted by the Secretariat in regard to the issue. Sudan is polio-free since March 2009, and it is one of the countries that globally considered as priority for transition planning, an exercise that already under process. The achievement of being polio-free has a lot of risks for sustainability in my country. The recent detection of virus in a nearby country and the ongoing situations in others, all with open borders and free population movement, represent real threats to Sudan sustaining its position as polio-free. Our surveillance data showed the increasing number of acid-fast paralysis cases who did not receive polio zero dose, and Sudan, like other countries, was affected by the global shortage of IBV for more than 1 year. Though we have restarted the vaccination, but we have still a birth cohort who didn't receive the vaccine. While Sudan supports polio transition planning, it stressed the importance of continuation of WHO supporting the surveillance and implementation of polio NIDs, especially in high-risk areas, and assume it as crucial to minimize the risks. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudan. May I now request Norway to take the floor, which would then be followed by the delegate from China.
Thank you. Norway joins others in thanking the Director General for this report, outlining elements of a strategic plan for polio transition. As the report states, this is work in progress. Polio transition is a matter of urgency and must be a top leadership priority. The challenges that WHO, other health partners and countries will face when polio funding is set to disappear require a robust and well-prepared response. We therefore look forward to receiving a fully fledged strategic plan at the next World Health Assembly. The strategic plan must be informed by country transition plans, so it's important that WHO continues supporting countries in developing these plans. Polio transition poses both financial and operational risks for WHO. An analysis of these risks, completed by a contingency plan and mitigating actions, should therefore be part of the final strategic plan. Polio transition must be part of all future budget planning. We are pleased to see that the Secretariat has already included polio transition in the financial estimate for the draft Global Programme of Work 13. Norway supports the ambition that those polio-funded assets that are crucial for WHO's current and future work are maintained. In order for Member States to determine what a correct and realistic level of funding for these assets would be, a detailed costing must be presented by the Secretariat as a matter of priority, and as already requested at the last World Health Assembly. We would also like to join Japan and others in seeking some further clarification on the document on financial and administrative implications, which we received only yesterday. Chair, Norway will support WHO and its important work on polio transition. We look forward to receiving regular updates through mission briefings as appropriate. And finally, we reiterate our support to the amended decision as presented by Japan. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. May I now request the respected delegate from China to be followed by the honorable delegate from South Africa.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to thank the EB Secretariat for the polio transition program and its detailed information. We have taken note that the EB for the transitional period has made a lot of efforts. China actively responds to the WHO's polio transitioning requirements and supports the polio transitioning's new vision to realize and reduce the burden of the current world and to achieve a polio-free world. And its target first is to make efforts to the decentralized efforts of polio, and to make sure that the laboratories and the vaccination manufacturers to share the work of load. Number 2 is to protect the population from the risks, to provide safe and efficient vaccinations to make sure that the long-term protection of the population and from the risks of the re-emergence of the virus. Number 3 is to detect the incidents and to, through the monitoring system, to detect external environment and human viruses, and to ensure enough financial and human resources to effectively control and respond to the incidents. China stands ready to work with all other countries to make full preparation and to make full preparation for polio transitioning period and post-certification work, and to ensure that the future world free from polio virus. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you, China. South Africa to be followed by Germany.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to align ourselves with the statement read by the Congo on behalf of member states of the African region. We appreciate the priority that has been given to polio transition planning. South Africa particularly welcomes the new approach, which gives more attention to mitigating against risks in countries, as outlined in the 3 strategic priorities, an approach which goes beyond a focus on reduction of liabilities to the organization. Ensuring adequate capacities for polio-related activities and services, clear and clear post-certification activities cannot be overemphasized. It is important for countries to be supported to ensure that their national plans available, which are integrated with long-term national development plans, as this will be an important way to sustain domestic and sustain domestic human and financial resources. We see advocacy for global funding as being an important activity that the WHO will need to conduct. Sustaining the gains towards polio eradication will only happen if sustained funding in countries and global level is maintained. So we would like to emphasize that, and we look forward to seeing the plans that the WHO will be able to present to us in due time on the funding proposals as they begin to evolve. Finally, we would like to support the revised decision that has been presented along with the amendments that have been proposed by Japan. Thank you.
Thank you, South Africa. Germany to be followed by Israel.
Thank you, Chair. Germany aligns itself to the statement by Malta on behalf of the EU. We strongly commend the Secretariat for this report. Polio transition is one, maybe the largest challenge for WHO within the next 5 years, but beyond that, also for the affected countries, the currently employed polio staff, and the world surveillance structures which go far beyond polio. This is why we are very thankful that the polio transition is considered a core priority also by the Secretariat, and we believe the governing bodies should provide their oversight in any of their next meetings. We support the amendments as introduced by Japan. Like Canada and others, we urge member states that still receive polio funding to finalize their national transition plans and to take over commitment for polio assets. Throughout our discussions during this EB, some have brought up the assumption that the donors that on a voluntary basis have provided resources to eradicate polio would provide the same money to WHO once polio has been eradicated. We have our doubts that this assumption is realistic, and we believe it would be very unwise to base the polio transition planning on this mere assumption. Finally, Germany is supporting polio transition planning through substantive voluntary funding. Like Japan, Canada, Monaco, and others, we are surprised to see the fiche financière that was only released yesterday. Polio transition planning does not start now. We have approved the current program budget with the assurance by the Secretariat that adequate finances would be allocated to polio transition planning. This is why we are puzzled by the new price tag of additional $6.6 million US, and we seek further clarification why this funding is needed and what specifically would be done through these fundings. Thank you.
Thank you. Israel, you have the floor, which would then be followed by Morocco.
Thank you, Chair. I'll make a very brief and concise statement. Israel supports the statement made by Japan, the amendments proposed to the draft resolution, and also the concern raised regarding the late submission of documents. Thank you very much.
That was short and sweet. Thank you for that. So we move on to Morocco and then Indonesia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The most recent experience for the switchover in 2016 from the trivalent OPVs to the bivalent ones with the introduction of IPU has demonstrated a sharp imbalance between the supply of laboratories and the production of vaccines and the needs of countries. So we have to, in our strategies, bear in mind the fact that the transition has to be well prepared, not only at the strategic level, but when it comes to manufacturing capacity and the necessary guarantees. Therefore, the definition of eradication sets forth a total disappearance of the disease and the causal agent, including vaccines. Seeing our initial experience in the area of smallpox, the WHO was not able to destroy some of the stocks of vaccines of certain countries. This is very important when it comes to lessons learned when it comes to withdrawing the poliomyelitis vaccine. Furthermore, the current situation that we see with the rise of terrorism shows that certain biological agents could be used as weapons. Risks, therefore, are brought to bear on populations that haven't been vaccinated. This shows that we have to have a very sharp vision and risk analysis as well. And finally, given the fact that we're drawing more and more toward the final eradication of polio, we have to redouble our efforts in order to arrive at the expected results and to consolidate our achievements. This is going to mean strong political commitment at the highest level, where the circulation of the virus has not been stopped, and they have to maintain financial support for those states for the implementation of all the various activities that are part and parcel of the international strategy for eradication, and financial support and backing that's substantial in nature for the countries that are continuing their surveillance, even though they have absence of any new cases. This means also training and other protracted activities. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Indonesia, you have the floor, and then we will listen to UK.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thank the Secretariat for preparing report on polio transition planning. I have the pleasure to inform the meeting that Indonesia has completed exercise in developing the sustainability planning for maintaining Indonesia's polio-free status through collaboration with WHO and other relevant stakeholders and partners. The mapping of polio assets and all government capacities has been conducted, in which human resources with respect to polio eradication are now funded by the government. GPI partners, including WHO, provided limited operational and laboratory costs, and that the government of Indonesia will gradually take over these costs by 2019 to 2020. To maintain polio-free status in the country, several efforts are underway and a list of priority actions have been formulated. We ensure that tiered regular advocacy efforts are in place and engagement with local leaders and all related stakeholders are conducted. In doing so, we continue to mainstream the spirit of maintaining polio-free status, and that effort toward preventing polio must not be stopped. We also encourage acceleration of polio-related programs and work with all partners to ensure that necessary support remain available. All these activities are jointly organized by the Ministry of Health, provincial health offices, and development partners. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Madam. We give the floor to the Honourable Delegate from United Kingdom, which would then be followed by Ecuador. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The UK aligns itself with the statement by Malta on behalf of the European Union and agrees with the revised decision proposed by Japan. We strongly support ongoing efforts by the WHO on polio transition. We were pleased to see these efforts incorporated into the draft 13 GPW and the creation of a polio transition team under the Assistant Director General on Special Initiatives. The UK asked for a time-bound commitment by WHO to provide the final costed strategic action plan. We also expressed surprise on the additional paper provided last night and seek further clarification as requested by Germany. We note good progress on country transition plans and urge completion of quality country plans by the June 2018 deadline, incorporated into health sector strategies and aligned with plans to transition from other types of support, such as GAVIs. With regard to the draft post-certification strategy, we highlight the urgency in identifying future owners of polio essential functions at global and country level. The UK continues to take forward work on the WHO Global Action Plan for poliovirus, and in the interest of time, I'm happy to send an update to WHO. Finally, we urge WHO to continue prioritising polio transition and call upon the continued political commitment of all governments involved to ensure polio transition is a success. Thank you.
Thank you, United Kingdom. Ecuador, you have the floor, which would then be followed by India.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ecuador is in agreement with most of what has been said this morning, and so the intervention is sent directly to the Secretariat in order to save time. Thank you.
That's wonderful, and that should set a precedence. Thank you. So we request India to take the floor, which would then be followed by Australia. India, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. India appreciates the report of the Director General on the subject of transition planning, particularly its emphasis on polio transition being planned and managed in a way which is in alignment with the strategic objectives set out in the draft 13 GPW. India supports the proposed absorption of GPI staff and systems into general primary health care and public health systems. The platforms will serve to continue to support polio functions post-certification, as well as immunization, epidemiological surveillance, food system interventions, and maternal and child health. India has been polio-free for more than 6 years now. However, the risk of importation and vaccine-derived polio virus still persists. Mr. Chair, the delegation of India would like to mention that rapid scaling down of the National Polio Surveillance Project infrastructure may not only risk the polio program, but also related activities intended to strengthen immunization programs on the existing NPSP structure. This is critical to sustain and strengthen the gains made so far by India in polio. Government of India has also recently provided nearly $1.25 million to NPSP, which has also helped to rapidly expand the immunization delivery infrastructure. We strongly believe that NPSP network should continue to operate at its current level, with the global funding continuing to support the NPSP structure. This would be critical to our ongoing efforts. Mr. Chair, India remains committed to working with the WHO in making polio transition planning a success. Thank you.
Thank you, India. I see Colombia wants to make an intervention, so you have the floor, sir, to be followed by Australia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just 1 minute to point out the importance of all the elements that have been proposed for the development of the strategic plan, also to share the concern of a number of countries. We're also concerned when it comes to the risk of the supply of different vaccines, and so we've had limited supplies, and a number of countries in the Americas have made a number of efforts when it comes to eradication of polio, and my delegation would like to launch an appeal to say that we said to strengthen our economic and political will to make sure that all of the regions are able to see to it the plan is actually implemented and we're in conformity with the draft decision. We agree with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Colombia. And I note that the trend of making short and sweet interventions is increasing. Thank you very much for that. Australia, you have the floor, which would then be followed by Spain.
Thank you, Chair.
Australia would like to echo the concerns raised by Canada, the US and others about the substantial risks faced by WHO and member states as polio resources decline in coming years. We are particularly concerned about the impact on WHO's operations across a range of program areas, including immunisation, disease surveillance and response. Australia notes the action taken by WHO to date to manage polio transition and minimise potential liabilities. We also note WHO's development of a new vision for transition planning, and we urge the Secretariat to continue to place the highest priority on addressing the programmatic, organisational and financial risks associated with this transition. This includes engaging proactively with partners such as Gavi and affected member states to ensure that essential functions at the country level are maintained and financially sustainable as polio resources decline. Noting the transition plan is scheduled to be completed for consideration by the Assembly in May 2018, we wish to seek further information on the process and timeframe for consultation with member states and other relevant partners prior to the Assembly. Australia also supports the draft decision with the amendments proposed by Japan. Thank you.
Thank you. And Spain, now you have the floor.
Spain would like to thank the Secretariat for all the work that's been carried out in the area of the transition planning. We'd like to also support the declaration made by Germany on this item. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. As I see no more member states, so we'll go on to the international organizations and UN organizations. UNICEF is the first, to be followed by IFRC.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And first of all, we would like to thank the DG and the WHO leadership for this discussion on the polio transition planning. And we also welcome the comments of WHO member states on the need to mitigate the impact of the polio funding ramp down on country health systems. UNICEF continues to be a critical partner to WHO in polio transition, especially at the country level, working closely with governments to develop their national polio transition plans. We are happy to see that 11 countries now have draft plans developed with the support from WHO and UNICEF country offices. We are working very closely with WHO to urge country governments to improve the quality of these draft plans to ensure their successful implementation. The aim is to make sure that the plans are finalized within the next 6 months and are made public by country governments. UNICEF will be also a key partner to WHO in the post-certification era in order to ensure that the world remains polio-free. The two agencies will continue to work hand in hand on functions related to immunization and outbreak responses with our complementary approaches. WHO is leading on the surveillance and UNICEF is focusing on demand generation to support immunization. We are also exploring opportunities to transfer the knowledge and the capacities in countries through the Communication for Development networks to support immunization and broader health services. Finally, as mentioned by many during the discussion, UNICEF is deeply concerned about the implications of the polio funding ramp down on countries with very weak health systems. We need a differentiated strategy for those countries involving whole health and development partners. Support to these countries should take a phased approach, finding opportunities to fill the gaps in the short term while working with the countries on their long-term strategy to assume full responsibility. UNICEF will continue to work together with WHO to advocate with key partners to continue supporting these functions that often provide the backbone of the health systems in these challenging settings. Thank you.
Thank you, UNICEF. IFRC, you have the floor, to be followed by Gavi.
Thank you, Honorable Chair, Director, delegates, and colleagues. Thank you for the opportunity to deliver this statement on behalf of IFRC and Gavi Civil Society constituency. IFRC represents more than 190 national Red Cross and Red Crescent societies across the globe and currently supports the Gavi CSO constituency, a network of more than 4,000 civil society organizations, many at the subnational level, striving to ensure equitable access to immunization health services in every community. We thank the Director General for prioritizing polio transition within the remit of the newly appointed Assistant Director General for Special Initiatives. Leadership from WHO is needed at this critical moment to ensure the legacy of polio eradication and to ensure it's not lost. We are encouraged to see details from WHO on financial requirements post-eradication, and this is an essential first step to ensure member states are aware of the scale of the changes and to allow effective planning as polio funding increases. However, the potential for large and unanticipated financial gaps is high. This is a risk to polio eradication efforts as well as immunization and health systems, many of which are already fragile. We are concerned that progress towards operational of the activities required is to ensure a successful wind down of the Global Polio Eradication Initiative, or GPEI, that it's too slow. Further, as highlighted in the latest TIMB report, how these activities will be governed and implemented is lacking in detail. So in 2018, we WHO to prioritize communication about polio transition beyond the polio community. All actors across the health system must be involved in this process, including civil society organizations. This is especially vital at the national and subnational levels. 2, to support countries in mobilizing domestic to help support not only the surveillance network, but also the workers who are able to reach the vulnerable communities and deliver other interventions. 3, to initiate an independent analysis of transition from GPEI and Gavi support in the 8 countries facing simultaneous transition. The analysis should be transparent, reviewed, and include actors beyond the polio and immunization community. And finally, to ensure that easy-to-understand country-level plans for GPEI wind down are produced. These should examine polio-funded assets, non-polio services carried out through polio-funded assets, ability to sustain existing and future polio assets from domestic budgets, and plans to transition polio assets into routine services. These plans should then be shared with all immunization actors within a country to ensure good coordination and a comprehensive response. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Gavi, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, would like to congratulate member states and the Global Polio Eradication Initiative for their progress to eradicate polioviruses from all geographies of the world. Since 2014, Gavi has worked in close collaboration with the GPI and countries to facilitate the introduction of inactivated poliovirus vaccine into routine immunization programs worldwide. We also take this opportunity to welcome the efforts of GPEI on the work around the post-certification strategy. This illustrates the deep technical thinking by GPEI and provides strategies and programs that will be required to prepare for and move through a post-certification era. Whilst Gavi agrees in principle with the high-level guidance provided in the PCS, our engagement in the strategy will depend on further elaboration of governance structures, implementation modalities, and costs. Gavi remains very concerned by the continued risk posed by weak primary health systems and chronically low immunization coverage and equity in high-risk geographies to the interruption of all polioviruses and maintenance of a zero polio state. In the face of these challenges, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, would like to reiterate its commitment to work with countries and partners, including GPEI, to strengthen the delivery and coverage of life-saving vaccines, particularly in high-risk populations, and potentially leveraging the experience and expertise of polio-funded assets. This effort is rooted in the Vaccine Alliance overriding principles of equity, strong country ownership, and sustainability. Last not least, Gavi underlines the importance of accelerating development of nationally owned polio transition plans and ensuring a robust sector-wide dialogue at country level to determine essential functions to maintain cross-cutting expertise and mechanisms that have benefited the achievement of a polio-free state. We rely on the leadership of WHO to bring member states and stakeholders to the table to determine appropriate action to implement the post-certification strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Gavi. And we move on to non-state actors, where we have International Pharmaceutical Students Federation to be followed by Global Health Council. You have the floor, IPSF.
Thank you, Chair, for giving the Honorable Chair, distinguished delegates. The International Pharmaceutical Students Federation is the voice of over 350,000 pharmacy students and recent graduates in 88 different countries worldwide. IPSF agree the proposed transition plans as put forward by the Director General report, while the transition period poses certain unknown challenges. It also presents opportunity to discover key areas in which to divert common efforts. IPSF believes utmost care should be taken when focusing on countries with the most fragile health systems to ensure stability in the transition and maintain general operating capacities with respect to public health. IPSF also comments the urgency with the most critical countries were addressed during the 67th sessions of the WHO Regional Committee for Africa in 2017. Furthermore, the dedicated and transparent web page to track developments in the transitions should prove to be beneficial. As noted in Annex 1 of the report, several member states aim to maintain immunizations within their transition plans, both in surveillance to ensure early detections in potential emerging cases, as well as in service delivery. IPSF believes that in this transition and in the phasing out of bivalent oral polio vaccines toward inactivated polio vaccines for sustained immunizations in the years to come, pharmacists can play a central role in reaching these aims. With sufficient supporting legislation, presumed investments into existing health workforce would mostly need to focus on attaining competency in immunizations where necessary. International Pharmaceutical Students Federation also believes the broader use of funds and existing assets in emergency preparedness deserve attention. The eventual transition and diminishing funds should be carried out in a way that preserves as many assets as possible. To prevent potential domino effect that would impact this country's educational system and training, particularly in pharmaceutical care and health in general. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We now request Global Health Council to take the floor, to be followed by Rotary International.
On behalf of the Global Health Council, supported by PASS, Action, Result UK, and AAP, the eventual loss of polio infrastructure, staff, and funding poses significant public health risks. Additionally, continued environmental surveillance and IPV will be required after the world is certified polio. Thus, we are pleased to see progress exhibited in the Director General's Polio Transition Planning Report. We applaud WHO for clearly identifying priorities for technical assistance, status of country transition plans, and post-certification financial requirements. These are essential first steps. Similarly, we appreciate that transition is being considered through the lens of WHO's 3 strategic priorities, enabling all related actors to maximize WHO's contribution to wider development goals. Ahead of finalizing the strategic action plan by World Health Assembly, we call for additional focus on the following. First, country transition plans must be finalized and implemented as soon as possible. The WHO Executive Board should continue to encourage commitment by member states at the 2018 World Health Assembly to sustain progress. Further transparency and accountability must be provided around deliverables, timelines, and indicators of country plan ensure gaps in the EPI do not occur, particularly for vulnerable populations. Second, clarification around transition management must be paired with clear commitments of financial resources from national governments to fully fund critical functions previously supported by the Global Polio Eradication Initiative. Third, as raised in the latest Transition Independent Monitoring Board report, the eventual absence of the coordinating body like GPEI will leave gaps not currently acknowledged or understood. Clarity on future coordinating roles and responsibilities is essential. Finally, all elements of transition planning must come with a robust communication effort to ensure that all stakeholders beyond the polio community remain informed. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And may I ask Rotary International to take the floor?
Thank you, Chairman. Excellencies, Rotary International's 1.2 million members welcome the report on the progress made in polio transition planning, including progress on the post-certification strategy. These processes are vital to ensure that the investment made in polio eradication is preserved. We encourage WHO to continue efforts to prioritize polio-related assets. We note the adverse impact that loss of these assets poses for the capacity of member states and WHO to respond to emergencies. We encourage continued work to ensure that polio assets can be fully leveraged to continue to strengthen health systems. We acknowledge that the transition of polio-related assets represents a unique and evolutionary process. We look forward to future updates to better understand how those functions which are essential to maintain a polio-free world will be sustained, and how essential functions currently supported by polio funds might be integrated into other health priorities within WHO's general programme of work. We look forward also to future updates on the status of transition and post-certification planning, and the related financial implications of those plans. We encourage the continued work at country level to develop national transition plans. We acknowledge the challenge faced by many countries to carry out this critical review of assets while focusing on polio eradication and other priority health initiatives. We are proud to have contributed to this process through our participation in the Transition Management Group, the Post-Certification Strategy Working Group, and at the country level. And please be assured that while Rotary remains committed to the eradication of polio, we will continue to work with WHO and countries to ensure we reap the full benefit of our collective investment in a polio-free world. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Madam. And that completes the list of speakers which I have. And if there are no other states willing to intervene, I'll request ADG Strategic Initiatives, Dr. Guerra, to please take the floor. Sir.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, distinguished delegates, members of the Executive Board, and colleagues. Let me first thank all the Member States for your deep interest in the polio transition planning and for your concern about the significant risks to be faced by the 16 polio transition countries and WHO as well, due to the scaling down of the polio eradication program as we near our historic goal. We must remember that we deal with transition now because of the very successful story of polio eradication that will be told to the next generation in a polio-free world, as we did with smallpox in the past. As noted in your statements, while the Secretariat has been able to provide substantial and useful information in the Director General's reports, we have only partially fulfilled the requirements of your decision A70/9. As per your decision, be assured that we will submit a detailed and fully costed strategic action plan for polio transition for the upcoming HA. Since the senior leadership team was appointed in mid-November, we have established a cross-cluster polio transition team at the headquarters. It's working closely with the regional and countries' transition focal points to develop a plan that is also aligned with the GPW13 vision strengthen country capacity by putting countries first. This arrangement is also piloting Dr. Tedros' vision for the internal reform. We did not work by departments, but by functions, not by office, but by skills, not by procedures, but by objectives. All WHO participated by clusters by level with the full engagement of regions and countries, and most of all, at zero added costs. To develop the strategic action plan, the transition team is currently working on 10-point framework and in the process of collecting and analyzing data on polio-funded capacities in the 16 focal countries, a 3-tier categorization of transition countries and the essential functions that need to be sustained for the post-polio certification period. Draft national government transition plans, the cost and proposed financing options to absorb the polio-funded capacity. WHO's countries and regional plans to address immunization and emergency capacity and functional reviews of country offices. All remaining gaps in functions or assets that would impact immunization services, surveillance, and emergency response and preparedness, especially addressing IHR core capacities. Detailed costing of the essential functions to be sustained in each transition country and proposed financing options. Impact on program budget 2018-19 and process to include transition costs in the development of program budget 2020-21. Current HR plans in each of transition countries aligned with the scaling down of the GPI budgets. Opportunities for staff to transition from polio functions to other program areas. And lastly, communication needs, as it has been very clearly and rightly said, and developing internal and external communication strategies. The point is that we cannot do this on our own. We need to rely on the assumptions that GPW 13 and what already clearly addressed by several delegations on the responsibility shared of member states, WHO, and other partners. We need the full ownership of the governments of the polio transition countries and the active support of the ministries of health, finance, and planning, as well as the international financing agencies. We will advocate with them through our representatives, regional directors, Director General, as one WHO. Let me assure the Board that we take your concern on the costing of the essential functions and the overall cost and transition plans very seriously. Based on the categorization of transition countries, we expect most affected member states to absorb these costs in the medium term, while some fragile states will need external support for a longer duration. We do not expect WHO to bear the entire costs of transition planning in these countries, and we will work to restrict all increase, focusing on such priorities as routine immunization and IHR core capacities building. As far as the concern of the costs that has been clearly and loudly raised, the overall cost of transition period and transition planning is made up of mainly 2 items, 1 staffing, 2 activities. We hear and respect the concern of member states regarding the overall, and in particular, staff costs. These are the maximum costs that transition period will have to face. It doesn't mean that it translates into additional financial costs. Whenever possible, the Secretariat will negotiate with donors funding positions that support current staff on a loan basis. These positions must be translated into the new polio transition team, though, and we will have to work with donors to understand and ascertain their willingness to reprogram the use of their funding for these transition activities and period. At this time, we cannot assume the acceptance of this reprogramming proposal, and we have included the maximum costs as said the financial needs of the management team. The concern of new hires has been stated. The only new hires for the team are the administrative support of 1 secretary and the new consultant dedicated to communication activities and products to keep members fully informed. We will also aim to convert current polio national program officers to the role of transition consultants in each country to drive the process and to kick off implementation. The remainder of the team are already on board in the headquarters or regional offices, and costs are subsidized through this budget. Only one full-time staff in one team. Staff includes secondments from 7 different departments at the headquarters, from 3 regions, and from 16 countries. At the 16 countries level, we need to facilitate implementation. We need to make sure that draft plans are fully endorsed and become implementable as of tomorrow. In this regard, we welcome the full engagement of all member states and other stakeholders in the planning process through a series of consultations between the Executive Board and the World Health Assembly period. We value your guidance in the joint development of this strategic action plan on polio transition that will be fully owned by member states, so that it becomes a truly collectively owned plan. We will invite concerned parties to join us in an informal steering group to guide the development of the fully fledged transition plan. I'd also like to inform the board that the lessons learned from polio eradication have been in close to 100 articles and reports. They have been widely disseminated through journals and are available in the GPI websites. Additional work is continuing throughout. Further to your request, we're also launching a WHO webpage on polio transition planning to ensure transparent and timely dissemination of all key data, information, and analytical work. The webpage will be updated regularly and will allow for a two-way communication channel with all stakeholders. I also want to thank in particular, all the 44 comments and questions we have received. And in particular, I'd like to underline what South African delegate said about the new vision that has guided the polio transition strategic paper, which goes very much beyond the reduction of liabilities by WHO. This is indeed with the additional cost that we have presented to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Guerra. Before I request the DG, I would request the Regional Director, AFRO, Dr. Moeti, to take the floor. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd also like to add my own thanks for the observations, comments, and guidance of the Executive Board members, as well as the others who have taken the floor. Just briefly to reflect from the perspective of the Afro region, to recall that in 2015 at the Executive Board, where I was being confirmed in my position as Regional Director, in that euphoria, I was invited by a partner, a donor partner, who is a major GPI partner, for dinner. And after the greetings had been completed, the first statement of my dinner companion was, what are you going to do about the $200 million liabilities that you are facing as you are taking on your position as the Regional Director for polio, for the polio transition? This has stayed on my mind as a priority ever since, and we have worked with my team in the last 2.5 years to support the polio transition planning in our member states. It is one of our priorities. We have engaged the ministers of health, particularly of those countries that carry the heavy polio assets, in the regional committees and special sessions, and in these sessions also invited senior Gavi Secretariat officials who attend the regional committee in an attempt to engage what we consider is a major partner of this work. As a comment on the new approach in relation to polio transitioning, I'd like to also share my own observations that indeed the polio assets, not only the staff, but the infrastructure and the experience have been pivotal to several programs in WHO. The Polio Emergency Operations Center in Nigeria played a key role in containing of Ebola spreading in that country. They played a pivotal role. Polio staff have also supported response and surveillance in relation to many outbreaks. It's already been said by member states of the African region, including the plague outbreak in Madagascar, the cholera outbreak in Ethiopia, the yellow fever outbreak in Angola. So the role of polio capacity in IHR capacity building and response to outbreaks in our region has been pivotal. Polio staff have had the most unique experiences in their attempts to work in the most difficult circumstances, very often great security threats, to underline the principle of leaving no one behind, of ensuring that the services reach children in the most remote areas, vulnerable communities, and insecure areas. And I think there is experience that can be brought to bear for our work on universal health coverage. I do believe that the innovations that they've had to undertake, the use of technology that has had to be part of the polio experience, are unique in informing what we'll need to do going into the future in our quest towards universal health coverage. We have developed in the African region an investment case on immunization, recognizing that going forward, after the post-certification period, to sustain the gains in increased immunization coverage, sustained surveillance and containment need to be part of the work that we do on immunization. This investment case will be followed by a mapping of the partners. We have started to engage what we consider to be partners who are interested in child survival, in immunization, in universal health coverage, and we will do that at the country level and also at the regional level. The progress made in national transition planning in the African region has already been outlined in the report, so I will not go into the detail. But I do want to underline the joint responsibility of member states as well as WHO and other partners in this, and our lesson learned in the last 2 years of engagement in supporting the planning is that it does really need commitment and engagement, and we are going to continue this work and are expecting that our countries that carry the major assets will have finalized their transition plan and had them validated by governments and partners at the country level by the end of March 2018. I just want to finish by reiterating our commitment at the regional level in working at the global level with the transitional planning in WHO to ensure that not only are these plans completed, but we also help to mobilize the resources to take over these vital functions in national health systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Ting-Wei. May I now request DG to make his final comments?
Yeah, thank you so much. I would like to join my colleagues in thanking you for your guidance and contribution. First of all, I would like to assure you that polio transition is our priority. That's why we have now a cluster and the Assistant Director General, new position, to really steer this with full authority and responsibility. The other thing we did is, as what Dr. Ranieri said, the cross coordination that will also help in having a very comprehensive transition plan. So I assure you that it's our priority, and that's why we have already made some bold decisions in order to strengthen it. We don't want to take any risk. Then the second is, as per your recommendation, we will develop the polio transition strategy, the costed one, which you have already proposed, and that's what we have been working towards, and have it ready for next assembly. So that's, I think, a clear outcome that's expected from us, and we will do that. And then the third, while focusing on transition, we should also, at the same time, stress the fact that the war on polio eradication is not over. And as a long-distance runner, a person from a long-distance runner country, the last lap or the last mile is the most difficult. So we need to be actually more aggressive. If the last lap or last mile is more difficult, then we have to really be aggressive and fight even harder to realize eradication. So while doing the transition, we should really be focused on the eradication. Number one is actually the success of the eradication. I think many of you have already stressed that. Then the transition should also be successful. So that's what I would like to stress. And thank you again for your support and guidance. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, DG, for your brief but very useful comments. As there are no more comments which I see, so I take it that the board wishes to take note of the report. Is the board now ready to consider the draft decision contained in document EB 142/11 as amended? So I see no objections. The decision is therefore adopted as amended. This concludes the board's consideration of sub-item 3.4 successfully. I think we still have time, so we could move on to item 3.5 on the agenda, and that is health, environment, and climate change, contained in document EB 142/12. The board is invited to note the report and to consider the draft decision contained in document EB 142/12, paragraph 37. The financial is not there? Okay. So I now open the floor for discussion for the EB members. I see Japan with their very short and sweet intervention. So you have the floor, sir. To be followed by Sri Lanka.
Chair, this time I think I need to disappoint you a little bit, only a little bit. In Japan, as well as other neighboring countries in Asia, health damage by typhoon and cyclones has been increasing. In addition, rapid industrialization is often followed by environment challenges such as air pollution. Moreover, sea level elevation is a real threat to many health facilities in island settings. So we acknowledge the importance of environment and climate change on health. There are many island countries, including us, in UPLO. We had many discussions at regional committee, and as a result, Western Pacific Regional Framework for Action on Health and Environment on a Changing Planet was developed and approved. I thank regional office and the regional director to facilitate this process. However, WHO's reaction should be focused, taking advantage of its mandate and relative advantage in comparison with other agencies. I hope this aspect is fully reflected in the process of developing a draft comprehensive global strategy on health, environment, and climate change. In the Secretariat document, paragraph 31, positioning of climate change in health crisis and in the health system is mentioned. Although we think it's important as well, the linkage with health emergency or health system should be carefully reviewed in the context of the global strategy. Our slight concern comes from that health emergency, particularly pandemic, is the core mission of our health emergency program, and we need to understand the implication of additional works. Regarding the monitoring of the progress, we suggest that the burden due to information gathering from member states should be minimized by WHO, linking the monitoring process with other international agencies in charge of related SDGs, and schedule of SDG monitoring done under the relative UN. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Japan. I'm not disappointed at all. You're well in time. I would request the delegate from Sri Lanka to please come in, and then Bahrain. Sri Lanka, you have.
Chair, Director General, delegates. Sri Lanka agrees that it is a priority to an action plan for the flagship initiative to address health effects of climate change in small island developing states and vulnerable settings. Sri Lanka also supports the work on developing a comprehensive global strategy on health, environment and climate change to be considered by the 72nd World Health Assembly in May 2019. But it is noted that the EB document 142/12 did not include working environment as an important part of environment. Chair, Sri Lanka would like to emphasize that work environment is an integrated part of the environment in general and can have a significant impact on the overall environment. On the other hand, environment and climate change can have a significant impact on work environment, thus affecting the health of billions of workers in the world. Therefore, while Sri Lanka welcomes the decision of developing a global strategy on health, environment and climate change, proposes to include the text with special attention to the working environment for EB Agenda Item 3.5. It should also cover occupational health aspects, environment and climate change and provide strategic directions for follow-up of resolution WHA 60.26 Workers' Health Global Plan of Action. It is proposed that the second action for EB is amended as to develop, in consultation with member states and other stakeholders as appropriate, and in coordination also with the regional officers, the draft comprehensive global strategy on health, environment and climate change with special attention to the work environment, to be considered by the 72nd World Health Assembly in May 2019 through the Executive Board at 144th session in January 2019. Thank you.
Thank you, Sri Lanka. Bahrain, you have the floor, and that would be followed by Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I speak on behalf of member states of the Eastern Mediterranean region. Our greenhouse gas emission is limited. Yes, our region is affected in terms of health impact. Therefore, we welcome this timely report on health, environment, and climate change by the Secretary. We endorse the initiative on health effects of climate change in small island, developing states, and vulnerable settings, and approve development of a global strategy on health, environment, and climate change for consideration by the EB 144 January 2019 and WHA 72 in May 2019. This is very much aligned with the Ministerial Declaration on Health, Environment, and Climate Change adopted by ministries and high-level representatives during COP22 in Marrakesh in 2016. In our region, environmental risk factors such as air, water, and soil pollution, chemical exposure, climate change, and radiation are causing premature death of more than 850 people annually, with 72% of these are the result of non-communicable disease and injuries, mainly amongst the most vulnerable people, and namely within emergency-struck countries. Although only one country in our region might be eligible to benefit from the Small Island Developing States initiative, but there are other non-island countries in the region that have significant proportion of their population living on the coastal zone and are vulnerable to the climate change effects affiliated with the sea. Therefore, we call for support from WHO to be extended to those similarly and adversely affected member states. In line with GBW 13 and WHO promotion of health in all policies approach, we encourage integrated, interventionally multi-sectoral strategy directed to both upstream and downstream environmental and social determinants. The health sector in coordination with key sectors such as energy, transport, technology, water and sanitation, and air planning, must show leadership and work with other sectors to assume its obligation in shaping a healthy and sustainable future. Implementation must occur not only through influence other relevant sectors, but also within the core functions of the health sectors. Feeding into the global strategy and initiative, the Eastern Mediterranean Region Committee endorsed the Regional Plan of Action on Climate Change and Health 2017 to 2021. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Barine. The delegate from Canada, you have the floor, to be followed by Swaziland.
Monsieur le Président, le Canada.
Thank you, Chairman. Canada strongly supports the preparation of a draft plan of action to counter the effects of climate change on health, especially in small and developing island states and countries in vulnerable settings. We also appreciate that a new global strategy on health, environment and climate change for the world is going to be developed. Canada will be only too happy to participate in consultations on this issue. We support the decision as proposed. As recently emphasized by the Lancet Commission, environmental and climate changes are offering rising threats to health, and they're going to affect other sectors as well. So it's important that those sectors participate in our work too. The decision, I think, reflects that the measures proposed should be put on the General Programme of Work platform, and we hope that that will help us to develop Strategic Priority 3. Canada would like to underscore the importance of WHO's focusing in particular on the gender-specific aspects of climate change and the disproportionate effect that they have on vulnerable communities and indigenous communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Canada. May I now request the Honourable Delegate from Swaziland to take the floor, which would then be followed by Netherlands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The Kingdom of Swaziland speaks on behalf of the 47 member states of Africa. The region congratulates the Director General for the highly informative and well-prepared report. The report gives a comprehensive detail on the human effects on the environment and, in turn, the adverse effects of the environment and climate change on health. Human health emergencies, communicable diseases, and non-communicable diseases are on the increase as a result of modifiable environmental risk factors. Many countries have become vulnerable to frequent drought episodes, desertification, and gross oceanic effects that have resulted in adverse effects to the communities whose livelihood depend on agriculture, fishing, and other related activities. Global assessment of the burden of disease from environmental risks show that low-income countries, of which the Africa region has the highest, bear the greatest disease burden. The effects of climate change has resulted in millions of people in the Africa region exposed to lifestyle conditions such as malnutrition and other health hazards. Children in particular and other vulnerable groups of our populations are the worst affected. Mr. Chairman, we note that failure to adequately address the environmental risk factors air, water and soil pollution, chemical exposures, climate change, ultraviolet radiation, and social determinants of health will slow progress towards the attainment of SDGs by 2030. Multi-sectoral collaboration on tackling the environmental risk factors will be facilitated, as many of these issues lie beyond the control of the health sector. In response to the devastating effects of the environmental risks on public health and in line with the Libreville Declaration on Health and Environment in Africa of 2008, the region on its 67th Regional Committee adopted a regional strategy for the management of environmental determinants on human health. This strategy focuses on safe drinking water, sanitation and hygiene, air pollution and clean energy, chemicals and waste, change, vector control, and health in the workplace. While commending the Secretariat's work in prioritizing environmental and climate change issues by including them in the 13th GPW, the Africa region requests the Director General to make special reconsideration and provision in the GPW for the Africa region's strategy by broadening the scope beyond small islands, developing states, and vulnerable states in the DG's flagship initiative. The Africa region notes the report and would like to support the Secretariat in redrafting the decision. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, respected delegate. May I request now Malta to go before Netherlands, and then we'll come back to Netherlands. Malta, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the EU and its member states. The candidate countries Turkey, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, Montenegro, and Albania, the country of the stabilization and association process, and potential candidate Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as Ukraine, the Republic of Moldova, and Georgia, align themselves with this statement. Climate change and environmental degradation are the defining issue of our time. Climate change affects people's health and development, increases the risk of conflicts, poverty and hunger, undermines human rights, and is a growing cause of forced migration. There are inequalities concerning both exposure and effects. Hardest hit are people living in poverty, as they are often directly dependent on natural resources, biodiversity and ecosystem services from forests, land, watercourses, and seas for their livelihoods. The Lancet Commission on Climate Change and Health has stated that tackling climate change might be the hardest health opportunity of the century. They based the statement on the potential health benefits of avoiding substantial impacts of climate change, together with the co-benefits of climate change mitigation and adaptation. As an example, by lowering the need for fossil fuel-driven transportation, cycling, bettering infrastructure, and greening the cities, we not only mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, but lower pollution and create more climate-resilient infrastructure. Agenda 2030 and the SDGs give opportunities to move forward in our efforts to improve global health. If we are going to achieve SDG 3 and 13, we need to work across the health, environment, and climate change agendas through a cross-cutting and preventive approach. We need to promote mutually reinforcing actions that support co-benefits of these goals and targets. Mr. Chair, health effects from climate change, in particular from natural disasters, lead to great welfare loss and economic consequences. Simply put, it's more expensive not to act than to take action against, for example, pollution and climate change at large. However, there is a need to expand knowledge on the links between health, environment, and climate change issues. The mandate and responsibility for adapting to climate change and building sound and healthy societies are divided between different countries, stakeholders, and sectors. Many stakeholders have other primary objectives and not always enough insight into the determinants affecting a healthy and resilient population. No stakeholder alone can manage all the different aspects of health impacts from environmental factors. Thus, a health in all policies approach is necessary. Likewise, there is a clear need for a more integrated One UN approach, in which all relevant UN organizations, such as UNEA, UNICEF, UNIDO, and UNCTAD, work closely together at the global, regional, and national level to reach all the objectives on mitigating the health impact of degrading environments and climate change. The EU supports the objectives of the DG in launching a flagship initiative on climate impacts on health for small island states and vulnerable settings, and even more strongly supports the development of a global strategy on health, environment, and climate change. We found the text of the draft decision to be unclear on process and timelines, and thank the Secretariat for the extensive answers it provided in response to our questions. We think the EB can benefit from the Secretariat sharing among all of us these questions and answers, also for the record of this meeting. We also consider that for good governance reasons, the flagship initiative part of the decision would benefit from having a timeline and a role for the governing bodies included in it. Therefore, the EU and its member states would like to propose the following amendments to the draft decision on health, environment and climate change contained within document EB 142/12. I will proceed to read out these proposals. At the end of para 1, we would like to add, and to submit the draft action plan for consideration by the 72nd World Health Assembly in May 2019, through the Executive Board at its 144th session in January 2019. To para 2, after the words regional offices, we would like to add, and with other relevant UN programs and specialized agencies such as UNEP. This para would thus read, to develop in consultation with member states and other stakeholders as appropriate and in coordination with the regional offices and with other relevant UN programs and specialized agencies such as UNEP, a draft comprehensive global strategy on health, environment and climate change to be considered by the 72nd World Health Assembly in May 2019 through the Executive Board at its 104th session in January 2019. A copy of these proposed amendments have been made available to the Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you, Malta. I would now request Netherlands to take the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The Netherlands aligns itself with the statement made by Malta on behalf of the EU and its member states. We would like to thank the Secretariat for this report on a very important topic. Regarding the proposed global strategy, we would like to bring the following to your attention. 1. In this area, the importance of an intersectoral, multi-stakeholder approach cannot be stressed too much. WHO and the health sector have to be advocates towards other sectors in addressing climate change and the adverse health effects thereof. 2. The strategy should also pay attention to the health sector as a contributor to the environmental problems. In the true spirit of the interlinked SDGs, the health sector has to do its part in this respect as well, in addition to its advocacy role. 3. Human influences on the global environment continue to grow, playing an important role in climate change. Poor countries with a high population growth are among those most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. Quality family planning is a basic health service that has the potential to support countries' efforts to deal with climate change, while stimulating the empowerment of women and reducing health risks for mother, child and families. Having said this, we look forward to the first draft of the comprehensive global strategy on health, environment and climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Netherlands. I think we have time for one more intervention before we break for lunch, and I would request Zambia to take the floor. Zambia, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Chair. The Republic of Zambia welcomes the report and aligns itself with a statement made by the Kingdom of Swaziland on behalf of the Africa member states. Mr. Chairman, the combination of long-standing unresolved and new environmental as well as health challenges cannot be ignored. The Africa region is particularly affected by this triple burden. We acknowledge that human influence on the global environment continue to grow and is the greatest threat to global health in the 21st century. However, it is important that as we focus on saving lives, we do not forget that degradation of the environment can have economic costs on the health sector. This failure to manage environmental risks will cause a strain on our health systems. It is recognized that health is relevant to all the SDGs and not only to GO3, and this is an opportunity that allows us as a health sector to engage broadly with all other sectors, thus focusing on primary prevention and tackling many environmental determinants of health. This Assembly may wish to know that as a country we have adopted the Health in All Policies strategy as recommended by WHO, which helps the health sector to interact with all other sectors. It has also been recognized that the evolving range of risks will require increased investment in primary prevention by member states. there is need for countries to refocus their resources if we are to shape a healthy and sustainable future. In addition, Chairman, targeted support for the most vulnerable nations is needed. Thus, significant initial investment is required through innovative national and international funding mechanisms. We therefore welcome WHO's request for accreditation to the Green Climate Fund. We support the decision, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Zambia. And now I have the pleasure to announce the lunch break. We would meet again at 2:30, and the next session would continue till 7:30 with a break at around in the middle. So thank you very much. I would expect everybody back at 2:30, and we'll start with Congo, followed by Dominican Republic after the break. Thank you, sir.